Chapter 49. Chapter 49. The Third Place Youth Flower Snatcher. Zhang Chao was attired in an indigo-dyed straight-cut chongpao embroidered with gold stripes which, in contrast, made his usually high-spirited look seem more steady and brought about a hint of nobility to him. Although he deliberately tried to mask it in his manner of speech and his bearing essentially, he had the air of a person from the bureaucracy. In Zhang Ruan's eyes this seemed shameless and disgraceful. However, in the eyes of the old Zhang madam, this appearance of his was extremely pleasing. The stern expression on her face also had a trace of an affectionate smile. After the passing of the new year, Chao would then need to participate in the imperial examinations. Did the teachers of Imperial Academy say anything? An enormous smile appeared on Zhang Chao's face, though he made an extreme effort to suppress it. As he replied, "They did not say anything." Zhang Quan shot Zhang Chao a quick glance as he continued, "Passing the imperial examination will not be an issue. It's only uncertain how you would rank. Whatever the case, everything that should be put in order, bribes, has already been settled." Dadian has been previously translated in other terms and meanings in past chapters. Here it does not only refer to bribery, but it also refers to the use of money to take care of his son and lobby/to influence his son's ranking. As a glint flashed in her gaze, the second Yinyang covered her lips and smiled. "That truly is great. Both of Foreign's children are alike. They are capable of creating literary works. At this exam, the second young master would inevitably obtain scholarly honor. As Cheshin sees this, he would definitely be nothing but the top scorer then." Although the second Yinyang did not like Xia Yan, still just for appearances while Zhang Quan was in the fu, she would always feign and put on a complete facade. Moreover, while she flattered and praised Zhang Chao, the old Zhang madam would also be happy. Therefore, saying such pretty words would unlikely put her at a disadvantage. Chieshin refers to the deprecatory self-reference for concubine women and often means I, myself. This is phrased as such to emphasize referring back to oneself. In this case, it is second Yinyang's opinion in her own dismissive, deprecatory way, similar to how intensive/emphatic pronouns are used in English. As expected, the old Zhang madam remarked, "Silly. This sort of talk should not be carelessly spoken." Yet, what appeared on her expression was a look without any condemnation and seemed rather joyful. Zhang Chao followed suit and smiled as Xia Yan gently pushed Zhang Quan. As every person in the room began to smile and laugh, they really seemed like a harmonious and affectionate family. Just at this time, when everyone was in an amicable and friendly mood, abruptly a voice interjected, "What is everyone talking about, to actually laugh and smile this joyously?" Zhang Ruan's lips lightly curled, and from outside the door, a beautiful married woman walked unhurriedly into the room. In contrast with Xia Yan and the other few Yinyangs, she seemed to appear extremely youthful. Dressed in an absinthe green thin cotton top with embroidered clouds and a goose on it, she had donned an embroidered skirt filled with butterflies flying in the mist and clouds. Combed into a top-knot bun, her hair had been braided into a fancy layered pattern that seemed like numerous flowers bunched together. However, she did not accessorize it with a hairpin but merely had a branch of a light yellow plum blossom in it. With a faint smile gracing her face as she walked forth, she had a sort of misty soft beauty. Unexpectedly, unlike the usual tenderness and suppleness of the furons of government officials, her delicate bearing did not have the slightest trace of artificiality and seemed as if it had been deeply engraved into her very bones. This precisely described the fifth Yinyang, Hong Ying. Regardless of any protests or obstruction given, Zhang Quan, a person who had quite a reputation, had stubbornly bought this star courtesan from the fireworks district. Initially, he had wanted to gift her to a superior. However, she had eventually become the fifth Yinyang in the fu. Due to this, considerable harm had been brought to Zhang Quan's reputation. At that time, there had been rumors that Xia Yan had even made some noise over this with him. But finally, the matter had remained unresolved. Still, when all was said and done, Hong Ying had caused some seedlings of discontent to sow in between Zhang Quan and Xia Yan. Now, although this gap in between them seemed negligible, it still remained a vulnerable area that could be properly exploited. T/N. Hong Ying's name has the characters that means red and tassel, similar to how her beauty can be literally translated and described as a misty, vapory beauty that has weighed down or hung down. Kinda like a red tassel that hangs and attracts your attention as a decorative element. T/N. This refers to Hong Ying's former status as a star courtesan, who had been sold as a slave and prized for her virginity or her skills in artistry such as in the art of dancing, singing, drawing, reciting and composition poems, the chess game Go or playing the guqin. This signifies that she is a prized possession of the pleasure house and essentially, the star performer and attraction there. In addition, she must have the appearance and the figure to match her status as a courtesan or as the trump card to lure in big-time customers. The matron would have a beautiful woman, who does not have much talent and still had her chastity, to sell her first time away. T/N. This is a euphemism meaning the prostitution area or the red light district, also commonly known there as the fireworks district. In her past life, by the time Zhang Ruan had returned to the Fu, Hong Ying had already reached the point of being a rival to Xia Yan that could equally match up on par with her to the point that no one was able to look down on her in the Fu. Nevertheless, due to Xia Yan being pregnant once more, Hong Ying had then bribed some servants to induce Xia Yan into a miscarriage. However, in the end, she was unsure of what happened, but her plot had been exposed. Jiang Quan had become furious and then had Hong Ying confined to her courtyard. Yet, Hong Ying had, by her own accord, ultimately hung herself. Now that she thought about it, although matters had come to a head, Jiang Quan still had not had Hong Ying beaten alive but merely restricted her to her courtyard. In all likelihood, he might have some genuine feelings for Hong Ying then. Thus, it seemed rather suspicious that without rhyme or reason, Hong Ying had hung herself in the firewood storage room. One could not help but suspect that this could have been Xia Yan's doing. In her past life, Zhang Ruan did not have much contact with Hong Ying due to the degree of absolute hatred and loathing Xia Yan had for Hong Ying. Now, it remained that Zhang Ruan herself still had no clue of what sort of person Hong Ying was. With Hong Ying's presence, when Jiang Quan's gaze fell upon her figure, the expression on his face slightly became gentler as he said, "We were talking about some of Chao's matters." Xia Yan's gaze had become slightly sluggish that it was almost undetectable, however, Zhang Ruan had caught sight of it. Innately, Xia Yan had a deeply educated air and appearance. In contrast, for a woman that had come from the fireworks district, Hong Ying possessed the charmingness that a young lady from an official family would not have. For men, this would aptly be filled with loveliness that was extremely attractive and mesmerizing. Jiang Quan was fond of talented ladies. Xia Yan had talent and Hong Ying did not lack any either. She was capable and well-educated in the four arts, zither, go, calligraphy and painting. While not as dignified and composed as Xia Yan, with her long worldly experience from meeting numerous people in the fireworks district, she understood and knew far better than Xia Yan what Jiang Quan liked to hear. Therefore, ever since Hong Ying had entered the Jiangfu, the reality was that Xia Yan was no longer Jiang Quan's only intelligent and charmingly understanding beauty anymore. Hong Ying faintly bobbed in curtsy towards Zhang Chao. "I heard that the second young master will be taking the preliminary rounds of imperial examinations in a few days. Qishan prays that second young master will achieve top marks in the imperial examinations and in one stroke, seize an overall triumph." Initially, Zhang Chao's gaze towards Hong Ying was somewhat hazy, but after hearing what she said, his brows could not help but smoothen out. "Many thanks to Fifth Yin Yang for your kind word." Jiang Su then smiled as she strode over and stood beside Zhang Chao. "Why is everyone standing? Why don't we move into the hall? Mother has already had delicious food prepared for quite some time now. We were only waiting together for father and elder brother to arrive." The old Zhang madam clapped her hands too. "That's right. It is still the second girl, JSS. That is thoughtful." Thus, the entire family then happily moved towards the hall. With distant eyes, Zhang Ruan swept a look around and waited until Jiang Quan had walked past her. Only then did she lightly speak up. "Why don't I see third younger sister?" The second Yin Yang, who was standing at one side, had suddenly paused in her movements as she turned around to forcefully mince out a smile. "The third young miss is a little unwell today, so she is in her courtyard, resting." Deeply troubled, Zhang Ruan then remarked, "Surely a physician has been invited over? If it is of import, then we ought to have someone give a call. After all, today is the day that esteemed father has returned to the Fu." "It's all right," Zhang Quan interrupted her and coldly stated, "We will just have her rest for a few more days." Zhang Ruan immediately became silent while the second Yin Yang viciously wrung the handkerchief in her hands. Then she slowly followed Jiang Quan, who had advanced ahead. Zhang Ruan faintly smiled once more. Without exception, Everyone who had sat to have a meal together was in high spirits. However, that was merely what was shown on the surface. Who knew what each and every respective person there was thinking or scheming of? After the meal, unexpectedly, Jiang Quan did not go to Yan Huayuan Xia Yan's current residence, but rather to Hong Ying's courtyard. Naturally, the second Yinyang felt aggrieved and in a string of words, openly cursed Hong Ying as a vixen before she left. Yet, Xia Yan tenderly sent him off and did not seem even the least bit unhappy. That very evening in her residence, as she brought up this matter, Lian Xiao remarked, "Foreign is certainly hard to deal with. The master has gone to Fifth Yinyang's courtyard after he had just returned to the Fu, and she, Xia Yan, can still summon a smile." Baiji stared at her blankly. "What nonsense are you talking about? But have I said something wrong?" Lian Xiao had always had a blunt personality and was unable to conceal her dislike towards Xia Yan. "I just can't believe that from the depths of her heart, she would truly be this delighted about it." Lu Zhu had crouched on the floor to stir up the coal chunks in the brazier as she lifted her head and blinked. Of course, it was for the second young master. Isn't Foreign wishing for the second young master to become the top scorer in the imperial examinations? What does Miss think? Would the second young master be able to pass the exam this time round? Unlike how she usually passed her time reading some books, Zhang Ruan had been sitting in front of the table. And who knew what she had been thinking about, as, ever since she had returned, she had been thoughtfully staring at the teapot the whole time. After hearing the conversation between her maidservants, she faintly laughed. Second brother is a human encyclopedia. Ever since he was young, he has been unusually intelligent and has been personally guided by our esteemed father since the cusp of his childhood. Moreover, all of the graphs have been extensively and thoroughly given to those in the upper and lower echelons. There is no doubt about it. With all that, he ought to pass. Then wouldn't that be terrible? Lian Xiao remarked in alarm. If the second young master truly did pass the exams, then in the days ahead, those in the Yan Huayuan would not even give those of us here the time of the day. I'm afraid that the old madam would side with the second young master then. Oh, what is there to be afraid of? I only said that it was only natural that he ought to pass. Why, I say the second young master will certainly not be able to make the passing mark. Jiang Ruan faintly affirmed. In her past life, Zhang Chao had indeed passed the exam, and although he was not the top scorer 6, he was still a true to honest third-place candidate, a flower snatcher scholar. At that time, with the emperor personally conferring his title to him, he was immediately pleased as punch with his success, and the Jiangfu's name had gained considerable fame throughout the capital. Thus, he had also gained the favor of the prime minister's daughter, having the completely perfect life filled with fame and a beauty by his side. Zhuang Yuan and Tan Hua. The first phrase Zhuang Yuan refers to the top score of the imperial examinations, which is a triennial court exam, also commonly known as the metropolitan exam. These scholars that take the first place, top thesis author, Zhuang Yuan, the second place eyes positioned alongside, Bong Yan, and the third place flower snatcher, Tan Hua, named positions in the examinations are addressed as Distinguished Advanced Scholars, Jinshi GD. It is an important title since only the top 3 graduates of the National Court exam could use this title. Furthermore, having a title of an imperial scholar, Jinshi, or a successful graduate, means that just passing the imperial exams, it was an equivalent to the modern Doctor of Literature degree or PhD. Therefore, these top scholars' titles and ranks embody the prestigiousness and reverence that commoners used to have for them, that they would even hold parades. However, in this new life, how could she bear to have him get what he wanted now? In this brief period of time ahead, she too would show him and give him a taste of just how someone who was high in the clouds could fall to the ground. Chapter 50. Chapter 50. Impoverished Grand Tutor. The new year had just begun, and the days seemed to carry within them the hint of spring. The sun had actually shone brightly for a few days, and the capital was especially bustling with noise and excitement. An atmosphere of joy was everywhere. However, the students of the Imperial Academy were in no mood to enjoy the happy atmosphere of the new year, as they were all preparing for the preliminary round of the Imperial examinations taking place in less than 2 weeks' time. Within the academy, the students were busily discussing strategy, while in the courtyard outside, the Master of Records was in conversation with the Chancellor of the Academy. This lowly official thinks that there are several promising candidates in this round of the examination, Master of Records Song mentioned as he glanced within the building. Chancellor Chun was just 40 years of age, but his hair was streaked with gray, giving him a sage-like appearance and poise. He stroked his beard and said, "Come, tell me what you think." Emotsong, Wang Ziling and Lu Min replied Recorder Song. He muttered, almost to himself, "These three have achieved exemplary results, whether it pertains to the 4 books, the 5 classics, the law, or the art of mathematics. More info here." Upon hearing this, Chancellor Chun did not immediately reply. After a moment's silence, Recorder Song looked carefully at him and asked hesitantly, "Does Darren think that this is inappropriate? Would it please you to share your thoughts?" Chancellor Chun simply shook his head. Lu Min is not bad, but the essay he submitted to the Emperor on current affairs, giving advice on policy, was somewhat biased. His grasp of the current political situation in the dynasty is not sound, and thus he cannot help being rather extreme. The Recorder Song also frowned. Lu Min is from an impoverished family, so it is no wonder that he is unclear of the current political situation. Chancellor Chun interrupted him. "I think Zhang Chao is not bad. I have read his essay and he attends to all aspects. He is talented." Recorder Song shook his head. "He is too polished. He puts forward eloquent but empty argument, which cannot be a good thing." Chancellor Chen's gaze shifted slightly, then he smiled slowly. "What you and I say is of no importance. In the end, it is the Emperor's opinion that matters." Recorder Song also smiled in agreement. When the morning classes were over, the students walked out of the Imperial Academy in 2s and 3s. Zhang Chao was walking right in front. He was currently all smiles as he chatted with his 2 good friends walking beside him. Wang Xiong 8 is becoming more proficient in his strategy and control, teaching his shouty to feel ashamed of being inferior. A tinge of shame surfaced on his face as he said this. 8 Xiong, elder brother, also used to address males older than or close in age to oneself within the same generation. Xiao Di, younger brother, also used to address males younger than oneself. Wang Ziling cupped his hands in greeting and said, "Zhang Xiong, you have no cause to be unduly humble. I cannot match you in your knowledge of mathematics." The young man in green on the other side smiled happily. "If my 2 brothers continue to be so self-deprecating, we might as well just jump into the moat." This person was Emotsong, who seemed to be in an extremely good mood. Waving his hand around, he said, "Studying the past few days has made my brain hurt. Why don't we have some fun? I will be the host today. Let's have a get-together at Dongfeng Lu. What do you say?" T/N. There's a little pun here. Zhuodong is to play host, but it literally means to be the East. And he suggests Dongfeng Lu, lit. East Wind House, as their gathering place. When the young men around them heard his words, they smilingly clustered around him. "Emotsong, since you are the host, why don't you invite all of us as well? It's really too stingy of you." Emotsong laughed uproariously. "You actually called me stingy. All right, this time I will show my generosity and extend my invitation to all the gentlemen. Then I won't lose the affection of my fellow students." The crowd of high-spirited young men walked out, smiling and chatting. However, behind them, a lone figure remained at the gate of the Imperial Academy. His figure was tall and slender, and he wore a blue garment which had been washed so often that the color had faded. He was fair-skinned and his features were delicate. However, he gave off the aura of barely concealed resentment and isolation. He looked from afar at the backs of the young men in front of him, and disdain briefly flashed across his face. This person was Lu Min, whom Recorder Song and Chancellor Chun had been talking about earlier. He was unlike the other scholars preparing for the imperial examination in that he was not from the nobility. Lu Min came from an impoverished family background, and his only family was a widowed mother. Lu Min's mother had an old friend in the capital who was a member of the upper class, and she found a way to have Lu Min admitted into the Imperial Academy. Lu Min's mother had always had an extremely strong sense of self-respect, but for the sake of Lu Min's entrance into the Imperial Academy, for the first time in her life, she asked her old friend for help. When Lu Min entered the academy, He swore that he would excel in order to repay his mother's sacrificial love and nurture. Most of the young men from noble families in the academy were of the idle sort. All they had were their names and reputations, which they did not live up to. Lu Min despised them heartily. The only one that he thought was not too bad was Emotsong, but he was from a rich family and did not associate with someone as poor as Lu Min. Thus, it was Lu Min who became the academy's oddball, and hence kept to himself. Lu Min returned to the academy study residence, where he was the only person in residence. All the other scholars were unwilling to stay there as the difference between it and their own residences was as wide as the distance between heaven and earth. Therefore, Lu Min had all the convenience of living by himself in a spacious residence at no expense. As he placed his textbooks on the table, he turned his head and was startled to discover that a letter had been placed on the table at some indeterminate time. The academy servants would only enter the study residence to tidy up, so he had no idea who could have left the letter there. After a moment's hesitation, he picked the letter up and opened it. As he did so, a sheet of snow-white paper fell out. It was the commonly used Xian paper 11, which was rarely seen in the academy because the other scholars from noble families preferred the specially selected, top-notch pear blossom paper. Lu Min bent down to pick up the paper. When he unfolded it, he was greeted by a line of vigorously written, cleanly delineated characters. I heard that in the past, wise men governed the nation by emphasizing honor, morals and customs, and the nation flourished. When these wise men departed, the nation declined. Therefore, the right way to govern a nation is by honor, morals and customs. However, others say that, while all these sentiments are good, they are not effective in controlling and managing the people. Balance must be achieved by means of law, and order that all people adhere to so that the nation can experience prosperity and stability. This person is a foolish child who is still perplexed by this despite much thought. And I seek my gracious Lord's opinion, that is, which do you believe works better and why? 11 Xianji, a type of paper traditionally made in Anhui province which is preferred for calligraphy/writing. Xian paper is renowned for being soft and fine-textured, suitable for conveying the artistic expression of both Chinese calligraphy and painting. More info here. Clearly, his advice was being sought. This was a common practice among the academy's scholars. If there was a topic or question which one could not understand and needed to discuss, then one would write a letter detailing one's doubts or queries. It could be considered an interesting method, used by the scholars to address incomprehensible issues. However, because of Lu Min's low status, no one had ever taken the initiative to seek his opinion on any question. The letter was not signed, so he had no idea who had written it. He pondered over it for a while, but still did not have the slightest clue. It was said that one's character could be discerned from one's brush strokes. He once again looked at the line of writing, which was confident, yet elegant. At first glance it seemed entirely composed of sharp points and edges. However, on closer examination, the strokes were smoothly made. The overall effect was to hint at an underlying emotion that he could not quite grasp. In that moment his competitive spirit was aroused. He took out a sheet of Xian paper from the writing table, ground his inkstone and set his brush into motion over the paper. When he had finished writing, he lifted up the Xian paper to blow on it. He was struck by a sudden difficulty. He did not know who had sent him the letter, and thus he had no idea who to give his letter to. After a moment's blankness, Lu Min shook his head and laughed at how obsessed he was. He placed his letter into an envelope, thought for a bit, then placed it on the writing table, deciding to take the entire matter as something of a joke. He was not the only person writing. In the Jiangfu, Jiang Ruan set down her brush. Bai Ji lifted the Xian paper from the table and blew on it, while Lian Xiao asked, "Do we send it to the same young man?" Jiang Ruan nodded. "Send it a little later, when the day has almost passed." "Miss, this is really not appropriate," Lu Zhu said with some hesitation. "What would we do if others were to find out about it? After all, this young man is a stranger, and the letter is so private. What is there to be afraid of? I didn't sign the letter." Without the slightest concern, Jiang Ruan continued, "Moreover, no one is going to make any connection between him and me. After all, we have never met." Lian Xiao asked, "Even so, it's still strange. Since Miss has never met him, why are you writing such things to him?" Jiang Ruan smiled faintly but made no answer. Lu Min must be reading her first letter at the moment. Jiang Ruan remembered clearly that in her previous life, the top 3 rank scholars had been Wang Ziling, Mo Tsong and Zhang Chao. Lu Min had only placed 18th. However, 3 years later, the news had broken that the principal examiner at that time had taken bribes. The emperor, thoroughly incensed, had punished the principal examiner. In the end, after looking through the essays submitted for that year, Lu Min alone had caught his fancy. Lu Min, then a 3rd-rank official, had been promoted steadily, until he finally became the imperial grand tutor. Chapter 51. Chapter 51. Mo Tsong's identity. In her memory of her previous life, although Wang Ziling had garnered the top score in the imperial examinations, the emperor had only appointed him to a previously vacant 6th-rank court position as Shurdu, one of the officials tasked with compiling, editing and reviewing the literature and history of the dynasty, in addition to tutoring duties. After this, for some unknown reason, he had made no further contribution or advancement. However, Jiang Ruan had once heard 8th Prince say that, although this person's talent and learning were outstanding, it was also clear that his field of knowledge was rather narrow. Moreover, he was fond of seeking connections with those in power. Although, in the capital, the Wang family were considered members of the nobility, in truth, they no longer lived up to their name and were considered nothing but empty vessels. There was no need to talk about Zhang Chao. In contrast to him, Mo Tsong was highly talented. His father, Mo Daran, was the minister of the imperial clan, and Mo Tsong was the youngest son. He was gregarious, excitable and inclined to have less regard for propriety, which could admittedly cause headaches for others. However, his opinions on political affairs were considerably advanced, and must have sounded fresh to the emperor, who had to constantly listen to the safe and conventional views of his gaggle of court officials. After Mo Tsong placed 2nd in the imperial examination, he was appointed as a 4th-rank junior minister in the Ministry of Horses, where he was only 2 ranks lower than his father. Mo Tsong was friendly towards others, and he received favor from the different factions in the imperial court. With someone like this, it was difficult to ascertain which faction he supported, and it could be said that he was neutral. In her past life, he gave the 8th Prince endless headaches. Of course, neither of these two could compare with Lu Min, who had managed to quietly surpass both of them. The emperor, unlike others, did not believe that one became more muddle-headed as one grew older. He was highly suspicious by nature. Not only that, in order to maintain a firm grasp over his court, he often acted unpredictably. While Mo Tsong and Wang Ziling had the support of their long-standing families, Lu Min was born dirt poor. Moreover, he was upright and plain-spoken when he interacted with others. This kind of person could be appointed to a position without cause for concern. Lu Min was also highly talented. Thus, this young upstart in the imperial court very quickly became the most trusted official by the emperor's side. If, in this lifetime, Jiang Ruan managed to win over such an important person, it would be tantamount to having someone speak on her behalf in the palace. In ancient China, numbers were divided into positive and negative numbers. Odd numbers were positive and even numbers were negative. Among the positive numbers, 9 is the highest and 5 is in the middle. Therefore, 9 and 5 symbolize the authority of the emperor. Most importantly, during that earlier time, Lu Min had steadfastly supported the crown prince. He placed great importance on tradition, customs and ceremonies, and turned a blind eye to the friendly advances of 8th Prince. However, circumstances would only be in Lu Min's favor in 3 years' time, and a lot could happen in 3 years. What Jiang Ruan wanted to do was to help this future imperial grand tutor, who was currently living in poverty, so that his golden opportunity would arrive sooner. Seeing that Jiang Ruan was still sunk in contemplation, Lu Zhu pursed her lips and spoke abruptly, as if she had suddenly remembered something. There is some good news. Zhou Momo woke up today, and she looks like she is in much better spirits. From the time Zhou Momo had fainted previously, Jiang Ruan had ordered Bai Ji and Lian Xiao to look after her. However, she had not regained consciousness, and they did not know whether it was due to the recurrence of some old malady. On hearing this news, Jiang Ruan's facial expression relaxed somewhat, and she said, "That is indeed wonderful. I will visit her." The night sky was full of lanterns which had been hung up to mark the passing of the year, but had yet to be put away. They brightened the normally pitch-black night with a warm red glow. Ordinary people strolled along the streets, and the pavilion stages temporarily erected by traveling performance groups could be seen in all directions. It was extraordinarily lively. In Dongfenglu, the purple and gold, pearl-beaded curtain separating the private room from the rest of the establishment was lowered. It concealed the doorway securely even as it occasionally flickered with dazzling brilliance. Within the room, a single person leaned against the window, indifferently looking down at the hustle and bustle of the crowds below. The lamplight shone on his profile, which was as elegant as a jade carving. His long eyelashes were lowered, so that no one was able to clearly read the emotion in his eyes. His clothes were as dark as night, but they were unable to conceal his cold temperament, or his innate grace and elegance. The curtain was abruptly lifted as a nobleman in green clothes walked in. He was handsome and upright, and his face was wreathed in smiles. To the young nobleman clad in black he said, "Aya, I have not seen you for a long time. Why are you in such a rush this time?" The black-clad youth made no move despite the other's entrance, and only said, "The emperor does not know. You are the only person under the heavens who dares to flout imperial decrees so brazenly," the green-clad gentleman said as he sat at the table in the middle of the room. He poured himself a cup of tea and drained it in one gulp before sighing. "If only you'd arrived earlier, I wouldn't have had to eat and drink in the company of that bunch from the Imperial Academy." This person was Emo Kong. The black-clad youth shook his head and asked, "How was the preliminary round of the Imperial examination?" "It was all right. I should be able to muddle my way into the top 3. Contrary to what one might expect, Emotsong was not in the least concerned. A sudden thought came to him and he said with pity in his voice, It's a shame about Lu Min. Such talent and scholarship. If he were not so obstinate, I would actually consider befriending him. If I am reading Chancellor Chun correctly, I am afraid Lu Min is going to unfairly lose out to Zhang Chao." Zhang Chao. The black-clad youth's brows knitted slightly. On seeing him like this, Emotsong explained, "He is the son of official Jiang Quan in the Ministry of War. Jiang Quan is really amazing to have such a son who is this capable and spirited. Not a day passes when he doesn't vex me. And I have no idea what Jiang Quan is teaching his son, but a few days ago the entire capital was abuzz with talk of the business regarding the Jiangfu's daughter. But Jiang Quan was still in the mood to fiddle with his son's affairs. Really amazing." The torrent of information that gushed forth from Emotsong was met with no response, so he inadvertently glanced up at his good friend. He noticed that the black-clad youth was seemingly deep in thought, so he said, "I heard Yifeng say that you had asked him to make inquiries regarding a young lady recently." Teasingly he asked, "Which family is she from? Do I know her?" The black-clad youth paid no attention to his teasing, but his expression became colder. Emotsong touched his nose. Although he looked embarrassed, he could not stop himself from saying, "You don't have to be shy, there is nothing to be bashful about. When we talk about other things you outclass me, but when we talk about the relations between men and women, you are my inferior. Another day, why don't I take you to a drinking party with female entertainers? That new girl at Chui Wei Lu is as elegant as the moon, and very gentle." While speaking, Emotsong stole a glance at his good friend's face. It looked as if the other party had not heard even a single word he had said, and he sighed again. "With your personality, I honestly have no clue what kind of person would catch your discerning eye. As far as I can see, the capital's beauties are all too common for you. Only someone who shocks all of society will be suitable." On hearing this, the black-clad youth's expression changed slightly. The memory of that night at the temple floated up in his mind. That young lady in plain cotton clothes smacking of poverty, her appearance which was exceptionally splendid under the moonlight, and the satisfied smile with which she had surveyed the corpse-filled ground, in contrast to her ice-cold eyes. The next time they met, her red clothes were fluttering in the wind, and she was like a mysterious fireball with the Shun Fu's secrets within her grasp. From his investigations, Yifeng had confirmed that it was this girl's first visit to the Shun Fu. There was absolutely no way she could have known about Shun Fu's secrets, but he did not know what remarkable ability she possessed. Rumor had it that the daughter of the Zhang clan was weak and yielding, But he had seen for himself that this was completely untrue. Who was she really? Emotsong looked at him in surprise. What are you thinking of, that you'd be so lost in thought? The black-clad youth came back to himself to some degree, and said indifferently nothing. Lao Ba has been keeping close company with the Prime Minister of late. There's a lot that is fishy about the preliminary examination, you'd better be extra careful. T/N. As explained previously, Lao equals old, but it is also a form of address for someone older than oneself, usually from the older generation, and denotes a degree of familiarity. It can be used derisively, which may be the case here, as I suspect Lao Ba refers to 8th Prince. A equals 8. The controls have tightened in recent days as well. The smile vanished from Emotsong's face, and his expression turned serious. My sister says that lately the Yang family has been behaving really overbearingly in the palace. Is this the beginning? Xiao, why don't you transfer some genie guard 6 to me? At present, something is not right in the Imperial Academy, and I am uneasy about Zhang Chao. Ah. Used in addressing those close to oneself, e.g. someone named Ming Rue would be addressed as Arue. 6 genie guards. Equals brocade, equals clothes, equals guard. The black-clad youth pursed his lips. All right. After a pause, he added, and keep a close eye on the Zhang family. Chapter 52. Chapter 52. Lantern Festival. Day by day, as spring began, the weather became better and better. And just like the weather, a person's mood would also seem to become better too. Jiang Susu and Xia Yan's treatment towards Zhang Ruan had become extremely courteous. Ever since she had been confined in her courtyard, there were no longer any sightings of Zhang Li anymore. Apart from the occasional encounters with Second Yinyang and her frigid irony and scorching satire, the rest of her days were actually passed ordinarily and peacefully. It seemed like it should have always been this steady and calm. Lu Zhu poured a cup of red jujube and lotus seeds tea, and in the tea was some of Sephora japonica nectar that had just been delivered to the kitchen. Its glistening color was extremely appealing. Propping up her chin with a hand, Zhang Ruan carelessly flipped through the book in her hand. Hence, tea is a common ingredient used in folk remedies and oftentimes to aid in alleviating problems such as gastric distension and fatigue. Lotus seeds are believed to be beneficial to dry throats, eliminate fatigue, increase mentality, improve brain health and tranquilize the mind, while Chinese red jujubes are believed to replenish and nourish blood, thereby improving blood circulation and lead to better liver, digestive function, balance of inner body energy and improved immunity. Miss should stop and take a break as our young lady has already read for half a morning already. Lu Zhu smiled. Those who aren't aware would have thought that our miss was planning to become the top scorer in the palace examination. Bai Ji laughingly scolded. You can even tease our young miss too. You're becoming more and more unruly. Lu Zhu looked at Zhang Ruan and merely laughed. But it is actually true, miss. Did newbie clearly say something wrong? This term is also similar to the status of serfdom in the feudal times, wherein many peasants were under a condition of debt bondage to their masters. Often, these servants were considered property or chattel that could be bought, sold or gifted with their contracts. Becoming a newbie is also a legal punishment for committing a crime or failing to pay a debt. However, in some cases, some people become slave servants in order to escape crushing poverty during poor harvests and famines as a way to help their families. More information about this can be found here, as the medieval Korean, Japanese and Chinese societies had similar social caste systems and cultures in certain ways. Zhang Ruan looked upon her 2 quibbling servant girls before her, and was about to say a few words, but just then, she saw Lian Xiao walk in with a cold expression on her face. On a usual day, Lian Xiao would also be smiling without exception. To see this expression of hers, she definitely had encountered some problems. As expected, without waiting for Zhang Ruan to speak up, Lian Xiao had already started to speak. Just now, newbie was walking by Yen Hua Yuan, but was then called to a stop by Furin's trusted servant, Li Momo. She said that our Ruanju was understaffed and Furin had personally selected a few Yatu, and after a short delay, they would be sent over. Bah! To even say that she had been content with her own position over these past few days. And sure enough, she has been uneasy instead and is harboring bad intentions. So, she has decided to plant some staff in our courtyard. Could you speak a little softer? Baiji promptly urged, the walls have ears. Lu Zhu frowned too. This is truly too excessive then. Zhang Ruan chuckled and slowly picked up her cup. To born such a banner of having good intentions and thoughtfulness for her, to slant such false pretenses towards her, as of yet, she could not refuse such advances. One could not always brazenly harbor suspicions of the madam who managed the household. Xia Yan had always been like this. Wrapped around her presumptuous requests were, unfortunately, a shiny and bright packaged exterior. Who truly knew what kind of vile and despicable intentions that she had underneath all of that? All of a sudden, as if it was whispered in her ears, she seemed to recall what Zhou Momo had said. Eldest young lady, this old slave has something that must be said, even if one has to brave through death. At that time of Foreign's death, it wasn't at all by chance and was definitely related to that woman from Yanhua Yuan. This old slave wanted to stay in the Fu to continue to find some evidence, but who could have known that I would have now fallen to such a state? These words of mine, perhaps the eldest young lady may not believe, but this old slave has been with Foreign for so many years. What Foreign's body condition was like, this old slave was extremely clear. At that time, the way that illness of hers appeared was fishy, and the master neither cared nor questioned either. Eldest young lady, Foreign was definitely harmed by someone. With fingers unconsciously gripping the handle of the fine porcelain cup tightly, Zhang Ruan's gaze had turned chilly. Xia Yan had something to do with Zhao Mei's death. These words of Zhou Momo's, she did not believe to be false. If Zhang Quan also knew of this matter and yet had been excessively tolerant about it until now, then in the days ahead, he could hardly blame her for being merciless. As she thought of this, she then heard someone announce from outside, "Young lady, Duan Jiejie from Guilan Yuan has come." Duan smilingly walked in. The old madam has asked Newbie to invite the eldest young lady to come over. There are some matters to settle. Zhang Ruan stood up and asked with a warm tone, I have troubled Duan Jiejie to make a trip here. We will now leave at once. Does Duan Jiejie know of what the matter could be? Duan laughed, eldest miss, please don't address Newbie as such. Newbie couldn't possibly be held in such regard. As to what the matter could possibly be, Newbie is unclear too, but can only notice that in these days ahead, the Lantern Festival should be taking place soon. The Lantern Festival. Zhang Ruan's pupils abruptly contracted as her expression suddenly turned rigid. Her hands seemed to have stiffened up and she was unable to relax, as if she were a stone that had been planted in an upright position in the spot where she currently stood. Baiji worriedly looked on. Miss, what's wrong? At this, Zhang Ruan then recovered her senses and laughed. Nothing's wrong. Yet, her nails that had been secretly clasped in her sleeves were tightly fisted in her palm. Lantern Festival. Lantern Festival. In her past life, what had caused her to have a bad reputation back then occurred during that spring festival she had attended a few years after returning to the Fu. From that day, everyone's sneering and ridiculing gazes, the worry of Xia Yan and her daughter, Zhang Quan's indifference, all of that was vividly etched into her mind. Although now that she could start her life once more, the days when she had returned to the Jiangfu had been a few years in advance of the present time. Thus she was unsure if those vile, repulsive days of despair that had begun with that festival would repeat themselves again once more. No matter if they did or didn't, there was one thing that was already different now, and that was how she could no longer be trampled upon nor taken advantage of like an idiot. For anyone who dares to cause trouble to her, she would then return it in 1,000, no 10,000 folds back to them instead. Duan had originally gazed upon Zhang Ruan smilingly, and yet at that moment, in her heart, she could not help but be shocked. She had just felt that Zhang Ruan's gaze seemed to be extremely oppressive and was actually similar to the mural that had been drawn on the wall of the temple, a semblance to one of the devils that was in the 18th level of hell. She even gave off a ghastly and terrible air. Yet in the next second, she saw that Zhang Ruan looked at her with a smile and her pupils were as bright and limpid as streams by the mountains. In a supple voice she remarked, "We will go to Zuma's courtyard then." In Guilan Yuan, Jiang Susu and Xia Yan had long since arrived. Seeing Zhang Ruan coming in with Duan, Jiang Susu took the lead and hopped off the old Zhang madam's divan. Her tone seemed to be irrepressibly excited as she spoke. "De Jejie, in 3 days, it'll be the Lantern Festival. Zumu has consented to us sisters in the Fu going together to have fun on Linglong Fong. De Jie has not gone there before, right? It's pretty amusing. Linglong Fong. This is likely the name of a large boat or an establishment in the story that has a business in this large boat. Linglong refers to the onomatopoeic sound of the clinking of jewels, or it can refer to the clever, or nimble. Thus, the name likely means clever/nimble large boat, and conversely. This is why we've elected not to use its translated name. Xia Yan tenderly continued, Ruanyang has just returned to the capital and the Lantern Festival is rather lively, why not go together to have a look? It would be good to be infected by the cheerful atmosphere as well. Zhang Ruan's eyebrow rose and in her heart, she coldly laughed. As expected, regardless of her past or her present life, that mother and daughter pair's wants and desire to frame her would never change. At Dajin Chao, the Lantern Festival was an extremely special holiday. As for lovers, it was even more so. For those that had reached marriageable age, both men and women would go have fun on this day, and so many beautiful and romantic tales had been composed during the Lantern Festival. And on this day, the aristocratic sons and daughters in the capital would respectively have their own amusement. There were 2 large vessels, both were carved with layers of stone, one was carved with a dragon, while the other had a phoenix, and both of the ships were decorated extremely gorgeously. The youthful upper-class young ladies, aristocratic daughters and princesses would be seated on Linglong Fong. The youthful upper-class sons, Wangya 6 and Huangzi 7 would then board Qingsong Fong 8. These 2 decorated vessels would then tour the lake side by side, thereby ensuring close proximity between both ships without compromising the etiquette of the distance needed between men and women. Da Hua Chuan. This refers to, in literal terms, a large and brightly decorated boat. However, to call this a simple boat would be an ill-used term. In feudal times, these extremely large vessels were often part of the crowning achievement of their time and oftentimes, a colossal architecture made by the brains of the country. It was deeply entrenched in the feudal Chinese culture wherein only the upper crust would have these boats as part of their yearly celebrations for the Lantern Festival to wish for happiness, longevity and good health for their families. Otherwise, similar to a modern parade, these flower ships would also be a culminating part of the Lantern Festival festivities for the populace and nobilities alike, wherein these ships would have beautiful courtesans to entertain guests and be part of entertaining the people down the lakes or rivers along the capital. 6. Wang Yi. A common term used in these ancient Chinese novels. In the feudal times, this is an honorific title granted to someone with a noble title such as Duke, Marquis, Count, Viscount and Baron. Ordinarily, this term of address is used for all these noblemen who are only second in power to the nation's monarch. But also commoners that have made great contributions will be conferred such a term of address. It usually means that this Wangye is a large landowner and is able to receive tribute from their land. However, this can also be referred to the current emperor's brothers who are conferred with this title too. 7. Huangzi. Another common term used in ancient Chinese novels. This refers to the princes of the current emperor, his sons. 8. Qingsong. This means pine tree, therefore pine tree boat. Pine trees have great symbolism in Chinese culture, and are also seen in Chinese literature. With its evergreen and verdant nature, the pine tree symbolizes the moral ideal and integrity of being firm, loyal and steadfastness. The Lantern Festival vessels were, truthfully, just the upper class and aristocracy's venue for matchmaking. The young ladies would largely display their own talents in front of these gentlemen, and if they were truly extremely talented, they would have many a noble admirer. After the evening has passed, by the next morn, their name would then be widely spread throughout the capital. Therefore, this day was also a competition to affirm one's status, as these well-bred young ladies from prestigious houses would secretly compete against each other in hopes that they themselves would be able to gain good future prospects and a good future husband. Jiang Susu had the title of the top lady in the capital, and this was precisely due to the limelight she had gained annually at the Lantern Festival. It was a pity that in her past life, Zhang Ruan was completely unaware of the know-how for this event and was tricked by Jiang Susu, resulting in her not only making a social gaffe on Linglong Fong but also having that sort of matter happening too. On the second morning, Jiang Susu was no longer the most talked about person from the Lantern Festival among the people, as that position had been taken over by Zhang Ruan. After that day's Lantern Festival, The gossip and rumors had spread all over the capital and Zhang Ruan's reputation had taken a devastating dive, becoming the biggest laughingstock in the capital. If it was just all of this matter could be considered nothing. However, in her mind, there was one scene that was deeply engraved into her memories. That day, everyone had completely filled with jeers and sneers for her. Then, only the 8th prince, he was the only one who had gently spoken up in Zhang Ruan's aid. At that time she was merely blinded, to have stubbornly mistaken the mockery in those pair of eyes of his as care and concern for her. In this life, if she saw this old friend of hers once more, although things had remained the same, people had changed. She now knew of the mercenary designs of his under that gentlemanly exterior. The Lantern Festival that would happen in 3 days' time. What sort of large present should she proffer up that would definitely be befitting for this new life of hers? Chapter 53. Chapter 53 Fifth Hong Ing. Afterwards, everything was decided as thus. In 3 days, all of the young ladies of the Jiangfu would go on to Linglong boat. Everyone was well aware of what the old Jiang madam had in mind when she decided upon this. Jiang Susu's expression remained the same, however. She was unable to conceal the slightest trace of excitement in the depth of her eyes, as she must have believed that this would once again be her chance to propel herself greatly into the limelight. Meanwhile, contrary to what one might expect, Zhang Li had been given a way out by Jiang Quan and had her confinement removed. Moreover, when one saw her at Guilan Yuan, it seemed that she too had begun to curb her own arrogance and exercise much more restraint. Once Second Yinyang caught wind of this chance, she was naturally thrilled. Ill at ease, Zhang Dan stood on the same spot and on her face was an expression filled with timidity, so much so that she had no concerted idea of how she should have comported herself and her hands were frozen. Zhang Ruan could not help but glance at her a few more times. Due to her being in a state of feeling incomparably inferior in her past life, she did not particularly go out of her way to be mindful and take note of Zhang Dan. Now that she observed her, this youngest sister of hers in the Jiangfu was just overly timid. The old Jiang madam then spoke of some things that they would have to take note of, and then waved her hand in dismissal as she permitted everyone to leave. Before leaving, Xia Yan especially stopped Zhang Ruan. I have selected a few yatu on your behalf. Later I will send them to your courtyard and you can first have a look at these yatu and see if they would be useful. If you feel that they are unsuited for your needs, we can switch with some others instead. Zhang Ruan slightly smiled in thanks and did not seem the slightest bit angry. Xia Yan's smile became increasingly abstruse and after the two people replied courteously to one another, they then parted ways. After waiting for a while for Xia Yan and Jiang Susu to walk further away, Lu Zhu then commented, "Foreign seems a little too anxious, as if she would not feel at ease with herself if she did not cause another to be disgraced. If outsiders were to look upon this scene, they would all assume that it was done for me, this daughter's benefit, and she would be beyond reproach." Zhang Ruan did not take it to heart. Lu Zhu had stayed with Lian Xiao for a long while now, so she no longer glossed over her words. As if she needed to make a clean breast of things, she spoke up. Who are these words of her trying to deceive? Even newbie, this servant, can tell their train of thought. Here in this fu, who is not well aware of it. Although the old madam also does not say anything, still after being in this fu for such a long time, her temperament would be neither naive nor still. With a splutter, Zhang Ruan laughed. Due to Lu Zhu being a newbie from the rural residence and not a person of the Zhang household, her loyalty towards the Jiangfu was inferior to Lian Xiao's or Bai Ji's. When they were discussing the fu's matters, it was as if she were casually talking about another family's matter. As Zhang Ruan laughed, Lu Zhu then recomposed herself and flushed. Newbie has gone overboard. I request for mischastisement. What you said is very true, Zhang Ruan remarked. Lu Zhu was not at all partial towards the Jiangfu and this, for her, was actually on the contrary a good thing. After all, what Zhang Ruan planned to do was in conflict in all regards to what the Jiangfu's stance was. For Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, it might perhaps be hard to accept such actions. Therefore, some of these affairs she could hand them over to Lu Zhu to manage instead. As they walked forth, someone ahead was striding in their direction. Leisurely, that willow waist traveled delicately and lovely swayed along with their pace. While that person had yet to arrive before them, still at the tip of one's nose, a whiff of faint sweet perfume traveled forward. That person was clothed in a short mint-colored cotton-lined coat and a light olive-colored long skirt, just like a gently swaying orchid in the wind. That person was the fifth Yinyang, Hong Ying. As she saw Zhang Ruan, Hong Ying's eyes curved as she faced Zhang Ruan and greeted her with a bow. Eldest young lady. Zhang Ruan lightly smiled. Fifth Yinyang is becoming more and more beautiful. Hong Ying's charming face reddened. The eldest young lady is truly jesting. These words, newbie does not deserve such praise. Zhang Ruan smiled even more amiably. Hong Ying was a discreet one, and contrary to her expectations, especially sharp-witted. At the very least, she would not clearly refuse her expression of goodwill. She then grasped onto Hong Ying, however. These words of mine are absolutely true. With an elegant demeanor such as Fifth Yinyang's, it's not surprising that father extremely dotes on you. Her voice then lowered. Now that I have returned to the Jiangfu, the affairs in the Fu are all foreign to me. As it turns out, with one look at Fifth Yinyang, I feel a sort of cordiality between us. In the days ahead, I have to request Fifth Yinyang's continued guidance and care. If someday I have done something wrong and have stirred up father's anger, I hope Fifth Yinyang can still help me to say a few words. As she said this, she unflinchingly stared at Fifth Yinyang. These remarks were clearly said with significance and profound overtones, as if they were suggesting something. In a split second, Hong Ying was a little startled, and as she raised her head, right then she saw that Zhang Ruan's gaze was filled with smiles. Hong Ying slightly felt as if her gaze was covered with a layer of fog. Although it could be obviously interpreted as limpid and clear like a bottomless pool of water, what was unexpected was the feeling that is also made one's heart well up with uncertainty. As she reckoned in the depths of her heart for a few turns, a frightened expression revealed itself on her face. What sort of words is eldest young lady saying? If I am able to be of help to eldest young miss, then newbie would definitely spare no effort in doing so. Zhang Ruan slightly smiled. Then I will first thank Fifth Yinyang in advance. From what I can tell, in this Fu, the only one that I can rely on here is exactly a person like Fifth Yinyang. With Fifth Yinyang's appearance, grace and poise, it truly is something that the primary wife, the foreign of the Jiangfu, could not compare to either. As she heard this, in the depths of her heart, Hong Ying could not help but be surprised and tried to sound Zhang Ruan out as she looked to her and smiled. Eldest young lady, don't joke with newbie like this. Foreign is like jade leaves on a golden branch, a blue-blooded nobility and a peerless beauty, while newbie has a low and humble family background. Naturally, the difference between us is like a comparison between the clouds in the sky and the mud on the ground. The gap could not be bigger. Fortunes rise and fall, so will the times change. I believe Yinyang has heard of this before? Zhang Ruan remarked. Who could possibly be able to predict the matters of the future? So Fifth Yinyang shouldn't undervalue oneself and be unduly humble. Having a low and humble family background does not necessarily mean that there cannot be good future prospects. Hong Ying paused and then lowered her head slightly as she lightly spoke. In 3 days' time, it will be the Lantern Festival. Eldest young lady has gone to the old Zhang madams. For her to have suddenly talked about this with her, Lu Zhu, who had been following behind her, could not help but be somewhat surprised as she heard Zhang Ruan remark, "That's right, along with the rest of my sisters. Oh, eldest young ladies is honest and generous. Just that, for some things it's still best to be careful. Lately, the foreign and the second young lady have been rather strange. Eldest young lady, be sure to take care of yourself." Once she imparted these words, Hong Ying no longer lingered, and without looking at Zhang Ruan's expression, she hurriedly left. Her maid, Lu Zhu, standing behind her, looked on thoughtfully. "Miss, there appears to be some hidden meaning behind Fifth Yinyang's words. She's an intelligent person," Zhang Ruan continued. "If only she could have brought this up and pointed it out to me in my past life too, how great it would have been." That last remark of hers was spoken in extremely low voice, and Lu Zhu could not hear it clearly as she stared on blankly. "What?" Zhang Ruan chuckled. "Nothing, let's return." Once they had returned to Ruanju, just as Xia Yan had said, the newly sent-over maids had already arrived at her courtyard. Upon seeing Zhang Ruan's return, they uniformly stood in a row before her. Bai Ji and Lian Qiao were the first-rank servant girls that personally served her, while Lu Zhu was a servant girl of the second rank. In the Jiangfu, every young lady had 2 first-rank servant girls, 4 second-rank servant girls, 6 third-rank servant girls. Yan Huayuan had sent over 4 maidservants and had even persuaded Zhang Ruan to personally pick the remaining servants a few days later. The 4 maidservants that stood and formed a row were without exception all good-looking young girls on the cusp of their maidenhood. Yet, even though Zhang Ruan had entered her courtyard, she did not spare them a glance and walked directly over to a soft divan and flipped through a book. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji did not say a word and quietly stood by Zhang Ruan's side. Now and then, they would be of service and serve her hot tea. They had truly regarded those few young girls in her courtyard as thin air. Just like this, more than half of a shurchen 2 hours had passed. Finally, someone could no longer endure it and one of the maidservants took the initiative to walk forward towards the divan and softly state, "We, newbie, greet eldest young lady." At this, Zhang Ruan then slowly raised her head. Appearing like an extremely unruly, bold person, she swept a glance over these maidservants. Yet, those raised pair of charming eyes were filled with keen radiance as her gaze finally fell upon the face of the maidservant who had stepped forward. The maidservant had been gifted with the countenance of a flower and a face like the moon. She had beautiful features and also possessed a somewhat educated vibe. This added an extra flavor to her good looks. Moreover, her head drooped lowly. She completely portrayed an entirely humble, modest appearance. "What is your name?" Zhang Ruan lightly smiled. "Newbie is called Xu Xiang," the servant girl agreeably replied. Xu Xiang. Zhang Ruan leisurely swallowed a mouthful of tea. She was the servant girl that had accompanied her into the palace in her past life. With a look at her modest and respectful appearance, she seemed good, honest and amiable. At that time it was precisely because of her ability to read that Zhang Ruan had taken a fancy to her and then had kept her by her side. Yet, her last impression of her was of that day, the very day before she had become a human swine. In the prison, Jiang Susu had come forth to visit her and by her side was Xu Xiang as her personal maid. Now she had once more been sent back to her JR's side. Chapter 54. Chapter 54. Conspiracy. The Great Jin Dynasty's annual Lantern Festival was on the 14th day of the current month, and was eagerly anticipated, especially by the young people. A few days prior, all of the well-known clothes and jewelry shops in the capital became extremely busy, and the cosmetic stores even more so. Early in the morning on the day itself, the capital's young talents gathered at a wine shop to discuss who had drawn the long straw to compete first in the Linglong boat festivities. Gong Biyuing Ka. In this method of drawing lots, which is common in China, a person is presented with a container of sticks made of bamboo, wood, ivory or other materials. Sometimes the sticks have words on them. Pulling the short stick is considered unlucky, similar to the short straw in Western idiomatic language. The idiom can be used to refer to how a person is chosen to go first in a competition, and also can describe how someone has placed first in a competition. Zhang Ruan was awoken early by Bai Ji and Lian Xiao. The two of them busied themselves selecting the clothes and jewelry she would wear that day. Lu Zhu, despondent that she would not be able to go with them, said resentfully, "Tonight, Miss will stand out from the crowd because of your looks and charm. What a pity, this servant will not have the opportunity to appreciate such a wonderful sight. I wonder how many young men will be mesmerized by our Mississippi." Lian Xiao heard the sour note in her voice, and laughingly scolded her. "What nonsense are you spouting? Why don't I let you take my place, and I'll just stay behind to look after the food, all right?" "How can I do that?" Lu Zhu pouted. "I'm not the one in charge of looking after Mississippi. Besides, the maids who have newly come to the courtyard are not easy to get along with. Since you all are not around today, let me take the opportunity to take them down a peg or two." "Miss Lu Zhu needs to calm down a little," Bai Ji teased her in a rare display of humor. "Don't scare off those cute little ladies. They are all just servants. What do you mean by calling them cute?" Lu Zhu said with contempt in her eyes. "Moreover, they are all black-hearted. Today I noticed that girl, Xu Xiang, searching for something in the inner room several times. After she had left, I checked, and do you know what I discovered? That Xu Xiang had pilfered a handkerchief belonging to Miss." "What?" In the process of combing Zhang Ruan's hair, Lian Xiao started, and could not prevent herself from crying out in surprise. She immediately ceased what she was doing. "Why didn't you stop her?" Zhang Ruan's gaze wavered slightly and she looked at Lu Zhu. However, she did not seem to share Lian Qiao's impatience. Instead, she appeared calm and composed. Lu Zhu said, "Miss has told us before to keep a close watch on these new servant girls, especially Xu Xiang. Where necessary, we should use our discretion and seize the opportunity to act, knowing that her loyalty lies with Yan Huayuan. From a young age, this servant has wandered the Jianghu with human traffickers and seen a lot. If it were only that Xu Xiang has light-fingered tendencies, that would be all right. The most problematic situation is if she is despicably base and unprincipled. Taking this handkerchief is not a small matter. If it happens to fall into someone else's hands, it could lead to the ruination of a young lady's innocence, and unreasonably cause her to be wronged for a lifetime. Miss was sleeping at the time, and if this servant had waited to report back to you, it would have been too late. So this servant acted on her own initiative." Commonly it refers a section of society operating independently of mainstream society, out of reach of the law. In late imperial times, world of traveling merchants, martial artists, itinerant doctors, fortune tellers, etc. Jian Ruan looked steadily at her. "What did you do?" A gleam of satisfaction appeared in Lu Zhu's eyes. "When she went out, I took the opportunity to exchange the handkerchief belonging to Miss, which she had hidden under her pillow, with one belonging to 2nd Mississippi." Bai Ji was stunned. "How could you do that?" Lu Zhu held up her head proudly. "If she really wants to harm Miss, we don't have to worry about anything. If they really try to make a move against Miss, the one who suffers will be 2nd Mississippi. This is retribution." Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. She said, "You did very well," and looked at Lu Zhu with new eyes. At the beginning, she had been grateful when this servant girl was bold enough to testify on her behalf while she was residing at the rural residence. Later on, she saw that Lu Zhu had gained much experience as a result of her extensive travels, and would be able to help her in many ways. Thus, after that time, each day Lu Zhu had proven herself adept at gathering information in the Fu. Today, she had shown both her quick mind and decisiveness in dealing with Xu Xiang, as well as her personality trait of having very well-defined likes and dislikes. Lian Qiao let out a long breath. "No one from Yan Huayuan has a good heart. Lu Zhu, it seems that we have underestimated you. That you're able to give this kind of report on the hatred towards us is cause for delight." "But how were you able to procure 2nd Mrs. handkerchief?" Bai Ji asked. "A few days ago, while I was crossing the garden to deliver digestive aids to Miss, I saw with my own eyes 2nd Miss carelessly leave her handkerchief behind. I originally thought of returning it to her when I had free time. Who knew that it would come in handy today? This is a prime example of what goes around comes around." 6. Songton Rao Gua Shui. This is part of a longer quote, which apparently first appeared in the 1979 film, People of the Jianghu. The gist of it is that the heavens won't allow those who have done evil to others to take pleasure in their evil deeds for long. Lian Qiao snorted and Bai Ji laughed as well. On seeing this, Lu Zhu also joined in. Zhang Ruan had a smile on her face, but she was already turning the situation over in her mind. Xia Yan really wanted to drag her name through the mud, and even the methods she was using were exactly the same as those she had used in Zhang Ruan's previous lifetime. In this lifetime, she had brought forward her plan involving the Lantern Festival by 3 years. Was it possible that she once again wanted Zhang Ruan to be totally defeated and experience a complete fall from grace? What would her reaction be? What kind of expression would be on her face when she realized that the person who would suffer such a fall in the end would be Jiang Susu? In Yan Huayuan, Jiang Susu sat at a table, carefully drinking a cup of lotus seed and red date tea. Her posture was dignified and graceful, and the smile on her face radiated purity and innocence, just like an exquisite fairy. Xia Yan looked with satisfaction at her daughter, her own flesh and blood. "Very soon, you will be a mature young lady, who will become even more charming and desirable. Who knows which outstanding young man will have the blessing of marrying our sewer?" Jiang Susu huffed with displeasure. "Mother, what are you saying? I am still too young, and tonight's Linglong boat competition is not an occasion to be looking at young noblemen. I have been practicing the guqin for an entire month, and tonight is the time for me to reap the rewards for my hard work." "You play so well. Even if I changed places with you, there's no guarantee that I would be able to display your level of skill. With pride in her voice, Xia Yin continued, "When it's time, recite the poem that I taught you. For sure, no one on the boat will be able to compare with you." Jiang Susu smiled. "That's wonderful," she said, then suddenly frowned. This is De Jiejia's first appearance at the Linglong boat competition since her return to the capital, and her natural beauty will definitely draw people's attention. Even though she did her best to conceal her emotions, her jealousy was still faintly discernible. Xia Yin noticed this and grimly stated, "You don't have to concern yourself with her. She is nothing more than an inauspicious girl. Given the way your father treats her here in the Jiangfu, there is no way that she will be able to surpass you. Thus, returning to our original topic tonight, there is no need for you to worry about her stealing the limelight from you. I have already made arrangements." Made arrangements? Jiang Susu was momentarily stunned, before she broke into laughter. "I knew that mother loves me the most." Xia Yin touched her forehead briefly. "In this fu, if someone cannot be of assistance to you, then there is absolutely no reason for her to remain, otherwise we may encounter setbacks in future. Jiang Ruan's appearance is breathtakingly magnificent. I have been observing her these past few days. Not only is she not stupid, but she is capable of deep thought. Looking at the way she dealt with Chen Zhao's family, she is clearly no fool. I don't know why, but she always makes me feel uneasy. Leaving her be would lead to disaster, so we should just settle her early." "Mother wants to kill her?" Jiang Susu asked. "What's the point of killing her? She's just returned to the capital, so Jiang Ruan can't do anything too obvious. However, after tonight, she won't be able to cause any more waves in the capital even if she wanted to." At this moment, if a casual passerby were to witness Xia Yan's expression as she spoke, they would surely be cowed by the ruthlessness that clouded her usually gentle and amicable face. "Mother, tell me your plan," Jiang Susu said as she straightened up. "I've also always hoped for her to be shamed." The eyes of this fairy-like young lady gleamed with sheer jealousy. Xia Yin glanced at her daughter disapprovingly. "I don't mind telling you the plan, but you have to remember after today, she will be vilified by everyone in the capital as someone who is inauspicious and unchaste. It will not be worth your while to engage or quibble with her on any matter. To do so would be to lower your social status." Jiang Susu coquettishly agreed. Xia Yan then sent out all the servants in the vicinity, leaving only a few confidants, and proceeded to explain her plan carefully to Jiang Susu. Chapter 55. Chapter 55, Second Younger Sister. Later that day, when the sun was in the west, it was time for the daughters of the Jiangfu to leave for the Lantern Festival. The rest of the Jiangfu would also go with them, but they would not board the Linglong boat. They would admire the entire capital's lanterns from the restaurant on the shore. The coachman was at the entrance early. Jiang Susu took the lead and got into the carriage, calling out to Jiang Ruan and the others to follow her. Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were in the same carriage as Jiang Ruan and Jiang Susu. Several of the Jiangfu's bodyguards also accompanied them to the banks of Yongding River, where the Linglong boat had been moored earlier on. Although it was said that the Linglong boat was spontaneously organized by the capital's noble ladies, the truth was that the yearly expenses were borne by the palace. Not by the empress, however, but by the currently favored and untouchable Xu Fei Nyang, the birth mother of the 8th prince. Xu Fei received the emperor's unstinting favor and regard, and her status in the palace was such that even the empress feared crossing her to some degree. Her own family was rich and arrogant, and she magnanimously covered the expenses of the Linglong boat as well as the Qingsong boat during the annual Lantern Festival, for the silver ingots concerned were but a pittance. She said she was merely seeking excitement, though it was impossible to discern if she had a deeper intent. More info. The carriage moved slowly along the capital's roads. As Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were Shu daughters, this was the first time they were participating in the Lantern Festival. Jiang Dan timidly looked down without speaking. Jiang Li's expression betrayed her impatience. If she were not so apprehensive about how Jiang Ruan and Jiang Susu would react, she would have already pulled aside the curtains and stuck her head out for a look. Jiang Ruan had closed her eyes to compose herself when she suddenly heard Jiang Susu asking, "What talent will De Jieje present?" Just as expected, Jiang Ruan laughed grimly to herself. But her voice took on a tone of astonishment as she looked up and said, "I have nothing to display." Why would second younger sister ask this question? Dejie does not need to be so humble. Pretending to be angry, Jiang Susu said. Is it possible that you are still shy when we are all sisters from the same family? Perhaps Dejie is not aware, every year, on the Linglong boat during the Lantern Festival, the daughters from each family will all put on a display their talents to determine who the best is, and the person who wins will be awarded the most beautiful lantern on the boat. Jiang Ruan lowered her head and muttered, almost to herself, that really sounds interesting, but I truly won't be able to participate. How is this possible? Jiang Susu said, when Danyang was around, whether it was the zither, chess, calligraphy or painting, she was proficient in all of the 4 arts. Thus, I cannot believe that you were not taught anything about them at all. Her tone was innocent, for all the world like a frank and sincere young lady, so that no one could possibly take offense to her words. When Zhao Mei first came to the Jiangfu, everyone recognized that she was a well-respected daughter born into a military family, but who was willing to be trained in the 4 arts for the sake of Jiang Quan. Yet, she did not receive his favor. Moreover, her level of achievement in those genteel skills she did force herself to learn for Jiang Quan's sake seemed puerile, like that of a little girl who has just learned how to write in comparison with those of the foremost talent in the capital. Jiang Quan greatly preferred Xia Yan and had her accompany him whenever the occasion allowed it, so her grace increasingly contrasted with her crudeness. At least, this was how it was perceived in the eyes of the general population. Jiang Susu's sarcasm was obvious as she raised the topic of Zhao Mei's proficiency in the 4 arts. I'm afraid second younger sister is wrong, Zhang Ruan said with a smile on her face. Surely second younger sister wasn't solely and personally taught by her mother? Naturally, this could not be the case. Father must have invited tutors for second younger sister. However, I was at the rural residence, and did not have the good fortune to have any tutors. Jiang Susu choked and had to pause briefly before saying, but I see that Dejie is so intelligent, and cannot be someone without any special skills. Moreover, this situation also has a bearing on the reputation of our Jiangfu. Dejie, why don't you give it some thought? If you have any talent which is passable, that will do. In second younger sister's point of view, what am I able to do? Jiang Ruan asked. Jiang Susu eyed her with some suspicion. However, Jiang Ruan's gaze was level, as if she really wanted to hear Jiang Susu's opinion. Thus, she said, calligraphy, playing chess and painting cannot be practiced to a proficient level in a short period of time. And Dejie has also not learned how to play the zither. Why not consider dancing to a song? Even at the rural residence, there must have been dance performances. If you could just master a few of those dance movements, that would be fine. Jiang Ruan nodded. This is indeed a good suggestion. Second young sister's insights are helpful. Zhang Li, who was sitting at the side, scoffed and said, just don't make a fool of yourself in front of the experts. Although these were her words, her eyes flashed with a hint of schadenfreude. In contrast, Zhang Dan on the other side, shyly smiled at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan leaned back. If that's the case, then I should think carefully about what dance to perform. I believe Dejie will surprise everyone and be the object of their envy, Jiang Susu smilingly said. Jiang Ruan closed her eyes, appearing to be deep in thought, but she suddenly had a moment of clarity. The young ladies of all the noble families would be on the boat, and their talents would be exceptional. Jiang Susu was suggesting that she perform a dance from the rural residence, a dance that was suitable for the common stage. If she really did perform it, then tomorrow night she would become the laughingstock of the entire capital. Jiang Susu was still using the same methods she had used in Jiang Ruan's previous lifetime, but this time she would not achieve the effect that she desired. After traveling for an indeterminate length of time, they heard the carriage driver shouting outside, and the carriage swayed to a stop. A few servants standing outside the carriage pulled aside the curtains, and the passengers exited the carriage slowly and in an orderly manner. Jiang Ruan was the last to exit the carriage. Just as she was about to step onto the grassy bank, as soon as she beheld the scenery before her eyes, she could not help falling into something like a daze. During the journey, the sky had darkened. Countless sky lanterns glimmered against the backdrop of the deep and serene night sky. The capital was indeed a splendid sight, and the flowing water of the moat, murmuring under their feet, was also brightly lit. All kinds of lanterns were spread over the surface of the entire river, and at a glance together they gave the impression of a moving river of light. The two ships at the forefront were carved with dragons and phoenixes, and were decorated with many exquisite lanterns. Green smoke curled upwards in spirals, and the pleasant sound of conversation and laughter could be heard. Kongming-dang miniature hot air balloons used during festivals. These were Qingsong boat and Linglong boat. Zhang Ruan took a deep breath and heard the voice of a little boy servant calling long and loud, "The Zhang young ladies have arrived." The sound of laughter and chatter stopped abruptly. On both boats from all directions, people turned their gazes one by one towards the big windows, until they converged on a common point, the young ladies who had arrived late. Since Zhang Susu was acknowledged as the most beautiful woman in the capital, she naturally relished the attention. Today, she was wearing a silver squirrel gua paired with a long narrow skirt in silver patterned with white plum blossoms. Her hair was done up in the flowing cloud style, and a white jade hairpin in the shape of a plum blossom was by her temple. As she walked, her snow-white cloak rippled with her breeze. She was like an exquisite, incomparable fairy who had descended to the earthly world. However, people's eyes only glanced at her for a moment before moving to rest on the young lady behind her. The young lady's entire body was enveloped in a bright crimson overcoat patterned with cranes, in sharp contrast to her fair skin, as pale as jade. This caused people to entertain wild and fanciful thoughts about the gentle and graceful woman wrapped up in the crane overcoat. Her eyes were like limpid autumn water and her eyebrows were like ink-black brushstrokes. Under the lights, her expression was delicate and dainty. Her upward slanting eyes harbored a faintly discernible hint of something cold and unfeeling. Her red lips were curved, and some of her long crow-black hair was simply swept up behind her head into a small bun, allowing the other strands to fall freely. In contrast to the exquisite and refined fairy, she was charming, bright and colorful, evidently well-behaved, and she had the appearance and air of one who was a born aristocrat. She seemed not to realize her attractiveness, which in itself was seductive. She walked towards the crowd step by step, and those watching her could not help but hold their breath, for they could not determine whether this bewitching demon of a young woman was a dream or real. Qiu Shui. Apparently this is a traditional description for a girl's beautiful eyes. She was so beautiful that it was terrifying. Chapter 56. Chapter 56. Coming across old friends. As was the case for the last outing, which took place at the Assistant Minister Shan's residence, most of the young ladies who attended the banquet were the capital's officials' daughters. However, they fell short of today's high-ranked misses. For many people, this would be their first time seeing the daughter of the Jiangfu. It has always been said that Jiangfu's Zhang Susu was renowned for both her talent as well as her beautiful fairy-like appearance. Therefore, they were all brimming with curiosity about this young lady who grew up in the countryside. Who would have thought that she had such a magnificent and graceful bearing? The Qingsong boat and the Linglong boat were in close proximity to each other. Both boats were moored side by side at the pier. Each and every move of the Jiangfu's young ladies, from the shore to get on the boat, could be seen by all the people aboard the Qingsong boat. Jiang Dan and Jiang Li were naturally ignored in favor of the Jiangfu's daughter. In the past, all eyes fell on Jiang Susu, but tonight they were focusing on Zhang Ruan. Aboard the Qingsong boat, an infatuated official family's young master dressed in resplendent brocade muttered, "A beauty from the city, and a beauty from the country." Zhang Ruan walked steadily. However, it felt somewhat ironic. In her past life, she also stepped onto the Linglong boat the same way, but unfortunately, she did not receive such amazed gazes from people. At that time, their eyes were filled with sneers and ridicule, as if they were watching a low-class person who trembled with fear upon entering the upper echelons of society for the first time. In this life, why had it turned out this way? She was not aware that in the past life, what Jiang Susu and Xia Yan had instilled into her daily, in addition to the way others looked down on her due to the many years in the countryside, made her grow into a timid person riddled with an inferiority complex. Upon returning to the Jiangfu, Xia Yan had pretended to treat her on such intimate terms to the point of spoiling her silly. In reality, it was a killing by overpraising tactic. She never called a teacher to teach her to read or how to play the guqin, nor was she taught any feminine arts. Also, she was left to her own devices in terms of her etiquette. For those noble families in the capital who observed rules and customs, she became a laughing stock. Besides appearance, one could earn merit through personal conduct and manners. However, in her past life she was timid and submissive. No matter how superior her appearance was, given such behavior, she failed to live up to the expectations. Later in the palace, in order to shape her into a perfect chess piece, the 8th prince naturally made her work hard on the guqin, chess, calligraphy and painting. Unfortunately, cultivating elegant demeanor worthy of the palace was not something that could be studied. In the past, all the people present there, without any exception, scrutinized her manners with malicious eyes and tried to nitpick even the slightest mistakes. The lessons of the past life's blood and tears therefore added a mysterious air to her. Now her leisurely movement and gorgeous appearance automatically attracted people's eyes. Jiang Susu's smile was still warm, but when carefully observed, it was not difficult to find the stiffness beneath it. When she stepped on the boat, she was immediately called by an acquaintance, Miss Xue, from the left assistant censor-in-chief's Fu. Jiang Susu took Zhang Dan in one hand and Zhang Li in the other, and walked towards her, intentionally or unintentionally, leaving Zhang Ruan in place. Both Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, who were standing behind Zhang Ruan, knitted their brows. Zhang Ruan gently curled her lips. After all, Jiang Susu was still young and did not know how to endure it. Nevertheless, when compared to other girls her age, she had a deep scheming mind and possessed a competitive streak, wanting to win every battle. Thus, once her position was threatened, she couldn't keep up her charade. She was left all alone. All the people on the Qingsong boat saw it clearly. Among these people, a young master dressed in blue said angrily, "How can they bully a delicate and pretty little girl like this? These women went too far." He was the young master of the commander-in-chief's Fu. At the same time, another young master echoed, "Indeed, that's really too much. If there is no precedent, I would really like to ask her to sit next to me." However, he was not the only one feeling compassionate towards her. Before Zhang Ruan could decide where to sit in the Linglong boat, she heard a familiar voice calling her, "Zhang Ruan, come here." When she turned around to see, it was indeed Lin Zixiang. Zhang Ruan walked over to her and sat down beside her. Lin Zixiang looked at her attentively. Then she nodded and said, "You look much prettier than your younger sister. The red color is also more pleasing to the eye than her hypocritical white." Zhang Ruan was speechless. Lin Zixiang pulled her hand again and told the people sitting around the table, "This is Miss Zhang from the Prime Minister Zhang's Fu, Zhang Ruan. She is Jiang Susu's sister." There were many small groups on the boat. The young ladies of the noble families, who were already familiar with each other, were sitting at the same table. Even though Lin Zixiang had also been isolated earlier at the Shen Fu, she had her own friends in the capital's young ladies' circle. Lin Zixiang also introduced to her, "This is Miss Dong of the capital's Inspector General's Fu, Miss Su, the young lady of the Chancellor of the Hanlin Academy, Miss Wan from the Regimental Commander's Fu, and Miss Zhao, the daughter of the Assistant Marshal." Dong Yinger, the young lady of the Inspector General's family, had a pretty and adorable round face. She told her generously, "So you are Zhang Ruan. Just now I was looking at you in a bit of silly manner. Little did I know that there is such a beautiful girl in the world." Her words were innocent and frank, without deliberate flattery. It gave people a good impression of her. When Fei Fei and Zhao Jinjun were both from military families, and their actions also carried heroic spirits. Zhao Jinjun laughed and said, "If I were a man, I would go to your manor tomorrow to propose marriage." Exactly when Fei Fei quipped, "You already have such a beautiful appearance. In a few years, all the ladies in the capital will have no face to go out." Zhang Ruan also smiled. "These elder sisters deliberately embarrass me. Today my eyes have been opened. There are girls in the capital who have a similar temperament and appearance. If I were a man, I would be fickle and marry all the sisters and hide you all away." The whole table of people broke into laughter again, looking joyous and harmonious. Lin Zixiang looked at Su Ruoshi. "Why are you so absent-minded?" Su Ruoshi was the daughter of the scholar in charge of the Hanlin Academy. She was normally a noble and proud person. Just as she was about to speak, A long and dragged-out sound was heard from outside. Jining Wang has arrived. 8th prince has arrived. Su Ruoxi's vigor was instantly replenished and her face turned scarlet. On the other hand, Zhang Ruan became stiff and tried to keep her mind steady so as to not spill her tea. She followed the crowd's gaze to look toward the shore, only to see a person in white quickly approaching. That man looked cultured and refined, and just like in her past life, he was slim and graceful with an elegant bearing, his face wreathed in smiles while walking toward the boats. The river was crystal clear, reflecting the hustle and bustle of the throng of people. Coming across old friends again on this extraordinarily lively night, it seemed as if the blue sea had turned into mulberry fields. Time brings great changes. The conversation and laughter on the Linglong boat came to an abrupt stop, but Su Ruoxi's glance did not waver from the 8th prince. The person behind the 8th prince was clad in black from head to toe. His brocade robe was embroidered at the hem with golden cheilants. He wore a jade belt and a pair of greenish-black boots. The youth was elegant and outstanding, his heroic spirit domineering. His eyes were as indifferently cold as snow, and he moved with a natural grace like moving clouds and flowing water. His charm was unexpectedly superior to that of the 8th prince. Su Ruoxi's voice trembled with excitement. It's Jining Wang. Zhang Ruan wrinkled her eyebrows slightly. She had seen this young man in black twice. Unexpectedly, he was the outstanding and famous Jining Wang of the Great Jin Dynasty. Translated by Mazu. Chapter 57. Chapter 57. Xiao Xiao makes his appearance. The people on Linglong boat were all young ladies of noble families. On seeing these two remarkably talented and handsome young men board Qing Song boat, all of the young ladies blushed and chattered away furiously. They are dragons among men. How is it that 8th prince and Jining Wang are here this year? Zhao Jin's suspicion-tinged voice was heard. While there were princes and noblemen aplenty on Qing Song boat during the annual Lantern Festival, 8th prince and Jining Wang had never attended the festival before. Firstly, there had never been talk about these two looking for a wife or concubine. Secondly, neither of them had expressed any interest in relationships with the opposite sex. From the time she had glimpsed the two men, Zhang Ruan's brows had been deeply furrowed. It was bad enough that seeing 8th prince had stirred up a complex net of thoughts and emotions which were difficult to describe. Discovering the identity of the black-clad youth had left her reeling in shock. When the music of the pipes plays 9 times, the legendary phoenix will appear. The current Jining Wang, Xiao Xiao, had an extraordinary existence in the Great Jin Dynasty. Xiao Xiao Zhou Chang Feng Huang Lai Yi and refers to the beauty of the music, which reaches such heights that the phoenix, a legendary bird, an auspicious symbol appears. It seems that Zhang Ruan is thinking about the mysterious black-clad youth. She views the fact that he has appeared before her several times as an auspicious omen. There is a possible pun as music of the pipes has become the youth's name. He was born into an aristocratic Wangju family. His father had once led his troops in a rebellion, which had been put down, but the emperor had surprisingly not said anything about it. When Xiao Xiao was 10 years old, the previous Jining Wang had led a military force to attack the Shirong. He had taken it upon himself to spy for the expedition and died in the battle. Xiao Xiao's mother had hanged herself in order to follow him in death. Thus presently, the only member of the family remaining in the huge fu of the Jining Wang was Xiao Xiao. Appears to be a noble title granted by the emperor, which can apparently be passed down to future generations. This title is just below the emperor himself in status/rank. Shirong, the Shirong, an ancient ethnic group of western China, from the Zhou dynasty onwards. Xiao Xiao himself was exceedingly outstanding. At such a tender age, he was already in charge of 300,000 genie guards of the Great Jin Dynasty. The emperor and the empress dowager were highly indulgent towards him, even allowing him to dispense of formality when with them. Initially, the emperor had intended to make a change by designating 8th prince as the crown prince, but Xiao Xiao had categorically opposed this in front of the entire imperial court. When the officials discussed imperial matters, they avoided this taboo topic. Strangely, the emperor himself said nothing about the situation, and the proposal to designate a different crown prince was dropped. Among the people, there were those who speculated that, in order for Xiao Xiao to be able to behave in such a way without qualms in front of the emperor, he must certainly be in possession of some dirt on the emperor and was threatening him. Added to all this was the fact that the previous Jining Wang had led a rebellion against the emperor. Hence, Xiao Xiao had earned himself the reputation of a rebellious scoundrel. However, no matter how much the people gossiped, Xiao Xiao's status in the imperial court was still formidable, no matter what his reputation was. He willfully refused to take sides or gather supporters, and seemed to be of a totally different species. In Zhang Ruan's previous life, 8th Prince had expressed goodwill towards him several times, but Xiao Xiao had flatly rebuffed him every single time. At the time when the old emperor died and 8th Prince had ascended the throne, Xiao Xiao had been with his troops, dealing with the Shirong, and Zhang Ruan had no idea what had happened to him thereafter. In her previous life, Zhang Ruan had only seen Xiao Xiao once, in the distance at a palace banquet where she had caught a glimpse of a person clad in black. However, at that time she had been totally focused on the 8th Prince, Xianli, and had no place in her heart for anyone else. According to the current time frame, Xiao Xiao was barely out of his 20s. When the people on Qingsong boat saw Xiao Xiao and Xianli arriving, a chorus of greetings arose. A nobleman clad in green stood up and walked over to Xiao Xiao. Smiling, he said, "This is the first time I've ever seen you attend the Lantern Festival. Could it be that you've taken a fancy to some girl?" This was Mo Kong. Xiao Xiao looked at him coolly, and without speaking, found a seat by the window and sat down. On the other side, 5th Prince's eyes grew wide as he noticed Xianli. "Lao Ba, what wind blew you here?" Lao Ba equals old, also used as a term of familiar address for an older male, equals 8, referring to 8th Prince. Xianli smiled politely and said, "Our imperial father commanded me to get out and about. He realized that I've spent so many years in the capital, but have never once observed the elegance of the Lantern Festival. So here I am." Naturally, to 5th Prince these words had a deeper significance. It was common knowledge that the emperor was inclined towards 8th Prince. That he should give such an order, coupled with the fact that Linglong boat was full of ladies from high and noble families, could perhaps indicate that the emperor intended to give Xianli a helping hand in finding a consort. 5th Prince's smile had hidden depths of meaning as he said, "That's wonderful. Tonight you'll have to take a good look around. Every single one of our great Jin dynasty's ladies is outstandingly beautiful and charming." Having said this, he smiled vaguely at Xianli, who responded with a warm smile of his own. Meanwhile, Linglong boat was experiencing turbulence on no small scale. This year, the arrival of 8th Prince and Jining Wang had stirred the ladies to great excitement, leading to many secret resolutions to strive fervently for fame on Linglong boat. When Fei Fei shook her head and commented, "Really, it's just 2 men. To get carried away to such an extent is simply ridiculous." She had spoken without thinking, but she then noticed Su Ruoxi turning pale. It was only when Zhao Jin shoved her gently that she hurriedly gathered herself to say, "Ruoxi, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about those girls who are really lacking in manners." Since she was from a military family, it was not surprising that she had no clue what she should say, and her explanation was phrased awkwardly. She could see Su Ruoxi's face becoming even more pale. While Dong Yinger felt somewhat helpless, Zhang Ruan smiled and said softly, "When Jie is right, but today's situation is a horse of another color. Jining Wang and 8th Prince are both remarkably talented young men. To be able to see their noble visages today is indeed an incredible blessing. 6. To be startled thus by their imperial graces into doing something that one does not customarily do is certainly pardonable. In any case, these actions were inspired by the imperial family, so it does not matter one jot whether they are to be considered silly or not." 6. San Sheng Yu Xing, lit. The blessing of 3 lifetimes. She had equated admiration for the young men to respect for the imperial household, so Su Ruoxi's face gradually regained its color. When Fei Fei looked at Zhang Ruan gratefully, but Zhang Ruan herself was looking a little pensive. The current situation had shown beyond doubt that Su Ruoxi liked Xiao Xiao. However, in her previous life, she had never heard any rumors about the girl whom Xiao Xiao liked. Thus, she was worried that Su Ruoxi's affectionate heart would be misplaced. At the same time, she was a little suspicious. In her previous life, she had never seen Xiao Xiao during the Lantern Festival. How was it that he would suddenly appear in this life? Could it be that some situations were quietly changing because they were a few years ahead of the original timeline? As she pondered the matter, everyone had boarded Qing Song boat and Ling Long boat. The boatman called out sharply, and the boat set off, moving slowly towards the middle of the moat. The water reflected the myriad colored lantern lights on the boats. The lanterns lit up the space between the heavens and the human world with dazzling light, making it seem as if one were living in a time that had long passed. The two boats sailed along next to each other, so Zhang Ruan was able to have a good look at the people aboard Qing Song boat from her position on board Ling Long boat. Xianli was entirely clad in white like snow. Time seemed to have turned back for Zhang Ruan. In her previous life, it had been on precisely this boat that she had met this modest gentleman, warm and gentle like jade, and offered her life to him. Xianli, currently seated and drinking tea, felt an icy cold gaze upon himself. When he turned his head to look at Ling Long boat moving in line with them, the young ladies on board the boat were all talking and laughing softly. Not a few admiring glances were cast his way, but none had the intensity he had previously felt. He shook his head, silently berating himself for being overly sensitive. However, he did not notice the girl in a red dress sitting by the window, bowing her head in a seemingly disaffected manner in order to hide the gleam in her eyes. A young noble lady on Ling Long boat suggested, "This year is the same as in previous years. Since we have already reached the center of the river, let's start the competition. The person who wins will have the most beautiful lantern on the boat." Her charming tone was persuasive as she stole a glance at the people on board Qing Song boat, but the deeper meaning behind her words was hard to discern. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. As she did so, she observed Zhang Susu, who was sitting on the other side, involuntarily sit upright, a faint smile upon her face. Zhang Susu would not let go of this opportunity, especially as both 8th Prince and Jining Wang were in attendance that night. A hint of a sneer flashed across her eyes. At the beginning, she had never considered the fact that she and Zhang Susu were both daughters of the Zhang Fu. So how was it that back then Xianli had taken notice of her alone, she of the bad reputation, and completely ignored the devastatingly beautiful Zhang Susu? On thinking about it now, it was all simply a joke, and one that was not particularly brilliant. Edited by Ely. Chapter 58. Chapter 58, Competition. The one who had spoken was Princess Rongya of the Grand Prince's Fu. She was beautiful and gentle. Her eyes carefully drifted toward the black-clad young man aboard the Qing Song boat. Another woman echoed, "Exactly. I don't know who's going to get the rabbit lantern this year." Princess Rongya smilingly replied, "If that's the case, then I'll start painting first." The noble women surrounding her were in agreement. Maidservants brought enhui ink and sheets of xian paper. Princess Rongya was considered a talented woman. However, as she knew that she would not be able to beat Zhang Susu today, she took a different approach, as painting a picture only took a moment. Soon after, the maidservant slowly revealed what was painted on the xian paper as Princess Rongya put the brush aside. "I'll embarrass myself." Huema enhui ink. Known for its quality, Hui ink sticks have distinct features and unique production techniques. There are many advantages in the use of top-quality Hui ink in traditional production. For example, some are as firm as a jade, distinct in texture and always durable. Some are full of ink aromas while grinding. Some are made of pine soot and glue and are very strong. Others are as solid as a stone, distinct in texture, and deepest black, which are invaluable. She had painted spring plum blossoms. A tree trunk in the snow-covered ground. The trunk was enveloped with dense snow. 2 butterflies perched on the trunk. Perhaps they were attracted by the fragrance of plum blossoms hidden within the snow. Her painting skills were not at all special, but the concept was outstanding and the composition ingenious. When the scroll was unfolded, it elicited everyone's admiration. There was a flash of triumph on Princess Rongya's mien. She took a stealthy glance at the black-clad young man on the neighboring boat but found that the man just bowed his head to drink tea and did not look her way. She felt disappointed again. On the Qing Song boat, 5th Prince rested his chin on his hand and exclaimed to Xianli, "Princess Rongya's painting is interesting, and she also has a very lovely character. This remark might be subtle and ineffable, but in fact it was meant as a probe. Princess Rongya was the apple of the Grand Prince's eye. If one received Princess Rongya's favor, the Grand Prince was bound to become a helping hand that could not be underestimated. Xianli smiled weakly and shook his head. Is that so? But I think the painting is a bit superficial. Fifth Prince narrowed his eyes and said meaningfully, Eighth Brother's eyes are always lofty. After that, the surroundings fell into silence. In the past, each and every noble woman volunteered to display her skills. Because of Jiang Su, they did not strive to be the best, but if they could seize the opportunity to make a name for themselves, it would be a very good deal. This year, however, because of the Eighth Prince and Jinying Hua, one an aristocratic prince that could not be provoked, while the other was a very outstanding yet cold noble, the ladies seemed bashful and nobody took the initiative to speak up. Zhang Ruan simply sat by and watched. Just then, she heard a delicate and timid voice ring out near her. Now that Princess Rongya has taken the lead, I'll go next. The person who had just spoken was Su Ruashi. All of the people seated at her table were astonished, except for Zhang Ruan. Su Ruashi was usually proud and virtuous. She had no interest in jumping around like a clown in these competitions for fame and fortune. Why would she take the initiative to make such a suggestion today? Only Zhang Ruan's eyes glimmered with understanding. Su Ruashi's appearance must be motivated by her desperate admiration for Jinying Wang. Women always want to show their best in front of their sweethearts. Su Ruashi usually acted noble and virtuous, still, she was an ordinary girl in front of the person she liked. Zhang Ruan admired Su Ruashi a little when she thought of this. Not all women have the courage to let go of their pride in front of their sweethearts, only wishing to blossom for him. Su Ruashi's action was somewhat surprising to the ladies around her. They were all frequent visitors to the Linglong boat. Su Ruashi had never participated in the previous years. This year's participation was very sudden. It made people feel odd. Princess Rongya smiled. What does Miss Su want to compete in? There were no set rules on talents. The men on Qing Song boat were not interested in rabbit lanterns, so such competitions were held only amongst the women. The noble ladies on the Linglong boat performed their best skills. In the end, the one who received the most praise from the people on the Qing Song boat would win. Su Ruashi blushed and felt somewhat uncomfortable, but she exerted every effort to maintain her cold and frosty expression. Since it's a celebration, I will just pen a few words. Su Ruashi was the daughter of Hanlin Academy's chancellor. She came from a well-known literary family and had been immersed in books since childhood. Her handwriting was quite good. She was still young. When her maidservant came over with the xian paper and a writing brush, she started writing without the slightest hesitation. She wrote without stopping. Her writing style was very natural, like moving clouds and flowing water. Her expression was also very focused. Su Ruashi was born delicately beautiful. However, she was usually too proud and aloof, making people overlook her facial features. When she wholeheartedly immersed in her world of writing, her iciness lessened and there was only gentleness in her expression. She looked especially beautiful and gentle. Many people on the Qing Song boat had begun to pay some attention to her. Some young noblemen said, "She's talented and beautiful, coming from a literary family indeed." When Su Ruashi put down her brush, her maidservant displayed her handwritten work in front of everyone. It was only a simple luck character, written in a rounded style. It was simple and neat. Zhang Ruan, suffering a lot in her last life at the Eighth Prince's hands, didn't believe in the saying, seeing a word was like seeing a person. But when she saw this one character, she couldn't help but praise it in her heart. Even though the handwriting was old-fashioned, it was just and magnificent. Su Ruashi was just like this character, a person who dared to love and dared to hate. Fu. Good fortune/happiness/luck. All the people present were literate. Naturally, they understood whether her writing was good or bad. They all applauded and praised her. Zhao Jin spoke. Ruashi's character writing has improved again. As far as the eye can see, in the whole capital city, only the Eighth Prince is comparable in skills. What is this talk? Dong Yinger was wreathed in smiles. We are all women. The Eighth Prince is a man. Comparing a man's writing with a woman, isn't Eighth Prince getting an unfair advantage? People laughed happily. In the midst of these admiring compliments, Su Ruoxi stealthily glanced at the Qing Song boat once more. Her brows immediately creased and her eyes turned dull. Zhang Ruan saw that, similar to her past life, Jinying Wang was the dream man of every female in the Great Jin dynasty. Unfortunately, Xiao Xiao was a romantically insensitive blockhead. Thus, many young women's hearts were broken. Su Ruoxi returned to her seat. Her action had caught the attention of many young noblemen on the Qing Song boat. However, she had been depressed since she returned to her seat. She ignored those admiring eyes and betrayed their goodwill. After Su Ruoxi's performance, another noble lady smiled happily and asked who should be next. But with the outstanding Princess Rongya and Su Ruoxi before them, no one dared to follow and be the humiliated person. In the silence, a cautious and solemn voice rang out. "Second sister, aren't you excellent at playing the zither? Dan Yang would like to hear you play the guqin." Zhang Ruan's eyes were a bit restrained. She looked at the speaker. Zhang Dan looked at the corner of her clothes anxiously, seeming somewhat afraid. But that's what she said just now. Zhang Su, sitting beside her, looked at Zhang Dan with some surprise, then blushed slightly. "Dan Yang, how can I play the guqin?" Her eyes were uneasy, making people feel moved as if they were seeing a frightened fawn. Translated by Mazu. Chapter 59. Chapter 59, a recurring mockery. Why, how could the second Zhang miss possibly say so? Princess Rongya was still smiling wholeheartedly. "Everyone knows that your guqin skills are unmatched. Why don't we have you play a piece for us today?" Previously, when Zhang Foran had become renowned throughout the capital due to her mastery of the guqin, it was such a pity that we never got the opportunity to see her. With you playing a tune today, wouldn't it be fortuitous for us to be able to see something spectacular? At the time, Xia Yan had been the most talented young lady in the capital. Her mastery over the guqin was truly something of perfection. Now she had handed this guqin of hers over to Zhang Su, who was also renowned all over the land for her talent. This was undoubtedly decorating something that was already perfect. It wasn't that Princess Rongya wasn't envious of this. Only, she had always been crafty and shrewd, and therefore, understood that men were not fond of watching over the sinister and envious machinations of women. So if she could, why would she not try to appear more magnanimous in spirit? In addition, Zhang Su's talent was truly incomparable to anyone else. And with that, this year's rabbit lantern would steadily and rightfully land in her hands. The noble women around them all echoed her request, as some were hoping to see a lively show. Some were offering some ingratiating flattery, while some were truly hoping to hear her play. When Feifei frowned, indeed, she truly can play the guqin. "Ruan Mimi, have you heard your second sister play before?" "I've not heard her before." Zhang Ruan had a smile on her face as she continued, however. "Her playing ought to be heavenly to hear. The sound can't help but make one feel relaxed and refreshed." Lin Zixiang merely cold snorted. "It's nothing much, just an act." Dong Yinger could only helplessly smile towards Zhang Ruan, but Zhang Ruan did not deign to reply. What was taking place now should be happening at the Lantern Festival in a few years, where Zhang Su's guqin piece had a lofty artistic mood, which was incomparably exquisite and elegant, that had truly been an extremely eye-catching performance. Moreover, with her own sorrowful figure and manner that served as a foil to Zhang Su. Between the two daughters of the Zhang family, one was like a pure and maidenly snow fairy, while the other seemed like muddy soil, extremely dirty. With that, such rumors were then quietly spread among all the nobility in the capital. At this moment Zhang Su was dressed in white clothes and adorned with simple yet elegant accessories. All these served to highlight that neat and elegant little face of hers, making it seem exceptionally dainty. Therefore, among the numerous young ladies present, she seemed unusually virtuous. With a smile bursting forth from her face, she said, "Since everyone has agreed, then I will show my poor skills and can only hope that it will not sully everyone's ears." With her sort of modest attitude, it immediately aroused a stretch of praise from everyone. Subsequently, a maidservant delivered an exquisite and precious guqin to her. Zhang Su then sat in front of the zither, closed her eyes and began to play. In the ancient Chinese era, playing an instrument often meant lighting incense to begin creating a tranquil mind and serene environment. This is derived from the belief that the action of doing this creates a spirit and body that is one with the heavens. Therefore, in the original text, there is a use of beginning to burn an incense here. On the Qing Song boat, all eyes had fallen on this remarkably stunning and beautiful woman. Emotsong lightly nudged Xiao Xiao. That would be the daughter of Zhang Quan's Fu. Now in the entire capital, one cannot find anyone that can compare with her either in looks or talent. What do you think? Xiao Xiao indifferently shot a glance towards Ling Long boat, and his expression remained cold and cheerless. Emotsong was unable to evoke a satisfactory reply and feeling embarrassed, turned his head around to continue looking over Jiang Susu's performance. Zhang! With that one sound, the sounds of the zither pierced through the skies as if similar to an unsheathed sharp sword. Jiang Susu's eyes fluttered open and her slender and beautiful fingers flew across the strings. Like a spotlessly snowy white butterfly, the sweet sounds from her zither trickled into everyone's ears. What she was playing was a piece called Serene Orchid. Serene Orchid. You can listen here. The sounds from the guqin were worldly and melodious, and as it flowed, there was not even the slightest trace of pause, thus, the music seemed even more tranquil and distant. With her dressing in white attire today, in the dazzled gazes of the audience, they seemed to feel as if they had seen an elegant and refined orchid perched upon a mountain ravine that was expressing its faint worries and grievances. All this could not help but make one feel tender affection in their hearts. The intentions behind choosing this tune were brilliant. Firstly, it had highlighted the lofty and unsullied fairy-like temperament of Jiang Susu's, and secondly, it also made the audience attach some importance to her and her worth as an individual. Who wouldn't be fond of such a girl that remained unchanged and unsoiled from all the turmoil and temptations from the secular world? Su Ruoshi slightly frowned. All of the people present had been deeply immersed in this guqin tune of the mountain ravine orchid. Yet, Zhang Ruan was the only one who had leaned against the window as she gazed upon the flowing river outside. Indeed, Jiang Susu had her name resounding across the capital, just like it happened similarly in her previous life. However, she was unsure if she, JSS, could truly bear such a huge recognition upon her shoulders. As expected, just after one song, there were some youthful gentlemen in the Qing Song boat that had taken the initiative to applaud. This song should have only been possible to hear and exist in the heavens. It is a rare chance to hear such a piece on earth. Everyone echoed in agreement, and for a moment, Ling Long boat too had been aflutter with compliments. Jiang Susu's charming face had reddened, and once more, she had returned to her seat. With narrowed eyes, the fifth prince glanced at Jiang Susu, and a trace of dazzlement flashed through those pupils of his. The second young lady of the Jiang family has a good appearance, and in addition to that, has this sort of matchless talent. Truly a woman of elegance and purity like an orchid. Xianli had given rare praise. The fifth prince had glanced at him. Lao Ba, if she is to your liking, then why don't you have Father Emperor give an edict and marry her home? Xianli shook his head. People can only admire lotuses from afar, but should not so lightly dally with them. Kayuan Guanbu Kaxiawan Yan. From an essay called The Theory of the Love of Lotuses by a Neo-Confucian scholar, it describes through a prose about how lotuses should have the universal love by everyone and how it is a lofty and pure flower. It also describes how girls would always somehow have a spot of them unchanged, and would be able to preserve the purity of the heart. In addition, it also refers to how girls' hearts are hard to predict. Therefore, admiring a girl from afar is when she is the most beautiful. However, when one plucks her down out of the desire to possess, this would then destroy that beauty and become unattainable. The second young miss of the Jiang family is indeed the prettiest lady in the capital. The fifth prince remarked, if one does not plan to get a head start and have her set in one's own sights while she's still young, perhaps she might even be snatched up quickly, since the quick-footed climb up first. This sort of young woman, even if it was just to place them in one's home to admire, that too would make one perfectly contented. Princess Rongya spoke smilingly. With this piece from the second young lady of the Jiang family, my sisters and I, if one were to compare, would truly be ashamed to meet people with our own skills. Jimimen, sisters. A general affectionate term for women of the same generation. Jie is jesting with me, Jiang Susu said. Sisters are all being gracious on account of my young age, and can't bear to have me embarrass myself, and therefore have sung such praises about me. Look, 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 Princess Rongya covered her mouth as she chuckled. This mouth of yours is truly so sweet, however, we certainly did not yield to you. You truly did play extremely well. However, with such skills of yours on the guqin, the person that goes next will truly be at a disadvantage. So is there anyone who wants to go next? The noblewomen on Ling Long boat looked at each other, but they did not speak a word. At this point of deadlock, Jiang Susu suddenly tilted her head slightly, looked towards Zhang Ruan and commented, "Dejie, you are superb at dancing, right? Today is your first time coming to the Lantern Festival after returning to the capital. Why don't you let everyone get to know you and show your dancing skills? How about that?" Everyone gradually turned their gazes towards Jiang Susu, then suddenly returned back to Zhang Ruan. On Qing Song boat, Emotsong doubtfully said, "Sai, how could the second young lady of the Zhang family let that big sister of hers who has just returned from the countryside dance? Wouldn't she be making a fool of herself? Although she has a pretty good family background, she probably has not learnt the four arts before." Zhang Ruan turned around and with a slight semblance of a smile, she looked at Jiang Susu in the eyes. "Dance? That's right, the large boat was traveling along the river and occasionally, there would be bumps. Although the hull of the ship was spacious, still if one were to dance on the ship, the vessel might have only been rocking, but one would very easily fall into the water." In her previous life, Jiang Susu had also made an open and candid suggestion to have Zhang Ruan dance. However, it was such a pity that she had been completely unaware of the rules in the capital's aristocratic circle, and truly thought that a dance from the countryside could be shown off on stage. So she had then danced to a song in front of everyone. The hull shook and rocked. With one tragic dance that one couldn't bear to watch, it made the audience sneer incessantly. Finally, to top it off, till this day she was unsure who had stepped onto the end of her skirt, and with one stumble, she had slipped into the water. That incident had made her become a huge mockery and a joke to everyone. Adding on to that, when she had been fished out of the water, she was still drenched. However, the icing on the cake for all this was the handkerchief with a man's love poem written on it that fell out of her clothes. Through and through it had truly been a joke. Now Jiang Susu was planning on making her reenact this mockery once more, right? Jiang Susu could feel that she had been stared at by Zhang Ruan with that charming pair of eyes of hers. She felt that the intention she seemed to have did not remain unknown and concealed to her sister, and subconsciously, she retreated a step backwards. "Dejie." At the next second, Zhang Ruan had already recovered her smile and indifferently answered, "My dancing is no good. Since Ermiai wants to see, I could just dance for Ermiai alone. Wouldn't that be great?" This comment of hers was truly baffling. To one's surprise, that stance of hers was certainly incomparably brassy, and in comparison to Jiang Susu, who evoked one's feelings of pity for her, Zhang Ruan's beautiful and alluring appearance possessed its own regal flavor. Many people's gazes were thus attracted by that attitude and posture of hers. On Qing Song boat, when Xiao Xiao heard her voice, he too slowly fixed his eyes on her. Chapter 60. Chapter 60, Crown Pressures the Capital. Zhang Ruan's posture was elegant, and after saying those skillful words, she stood up and repeated them once more with a smile. "Since Ermiai truly wishes to see, then I will dance for Ermiai, it's no bother either." Hearing this, all the noblewomen around them began to whisper, "Perhaps this person has been possessed. After all, how could she possibly, of her own accord, try to make a fool of herself? Surely, she must have stayed too long in that countryside village and does not know the severity at hand here. She truly believes that one dance of hers could ruin cities." A sense of mockery could really be felt in these words of the audience. For Lian Qiao and Baiji, who stood behind her, their hearts were in a fluster. They had been living with Zhang Ruan ever since she was little. Whether Zhang Ruan really knew how to dance, both of them were extremely clear. Although in the eyes of servants under their command, a master's every word and action were all wonderful. Yet, as maidservants, Lian Qiao and Baiji were extremely clear about the rules in the aristocratic circle. They were deadly afraid that Zhang Ruan had fallen for Jiang Susu's trap, and would commit a breach of etiquette in front of all these famous and prestigious families in the capital. On the Qing Song boat, the fifth prince narrowed his eyes. Born with good looks, yet what a pity she seems to be a fool. Where do these words stem from, fifth brother? Xianli lightly chuckled. The talent of second young miss of the Jiang family is already peerless, yet, the eldest young miss is trying to seize her limelight away. How can that even be possible? But after all, she is a woman that was raised in the countryside, so how could she know any better? In between those words of his was the faintest trace of scorn. Momentarily, everyone on the two boats had their tongues wagging, and without exception, everyone remarked that Jiang Ruan was short-sighted and delusional to be pulled into a comparison between Jiang Susu and herself. Jiang Susu flashed a trace of ecstasy in her eyes, but on her face was a gentle smile as she said, "Then Sun Yang is blessed, and I requested Jiejie to perform a dance for everyone." To perform a dance for everyone. Lin Zixiang furrowed her eyebrows, and yet these seemingly innocent words of Jiang Susu had made Jiang Ruan out to be regarded as one of those dancing entertainers that one would call for at will. For a moment, this had made some people around them cover their mouths in an insulting sneer. Without batting an eyelid, it almost appeared as though Jiang Ruan had not clearly heard what Jiang Susu had just said. In her past life, Jiang Quan and Xian Li had her do such things for the purpose of having her gain divine favor and surviving in the oppressive environment of the palace. This sort of comment to perform a dance for everyone, all of the imperial consorts around her had always requested as such. Therefore, just like a dancing clown, she had racked her brains to perform a dance. However, in the end it had merely given her a nickname of an idiotic beauty. Nodding her head in assent and without anyone's leave, Jiang Ruan had walked to the bow of the ship. The setup of the Linglong boat was very unique. For the convenience of being able to freely admire the moon during the Lantern Festival, the bow of the boat had been designed to be extremely spacious and smooth. As a matter of fact, this design had also made it a suitable area for dancing. Extending her hand out, she had effortlessly pulled out the hairpin behind her head that had been pinned into her coiled hair. Immediately, like a flowing waterfall, her head of fine black hair hung down to her waist, emitting an enchanting luster. Nipping onto the two-noted hairpin that she held in her hands in between her lips, her charming eyes that held much passion had swept a glance over everyone on the two large vessels. Then softly her lips moved. Unexpectedly, that two-noted hairpin was actually an elaborate tube-shaped whistle. Under the reflective contrast between the beautiful landscape and herself, the first note that overflowed from those red lips was clear and melodious. At first, one felt that the sounds from the whistle were dull and ordinary, as if one had used plain water to boil porridge that would have made one feel that its taste was dry as dust and tedious. Yet, her figure did not move and quietly stood on the same spot without the slightest movement. Then, some people on the vessels began to show evident expressions of ridicule and merely remarked that this eldest young lady of the Jiang family, who had just returned to the capital, was trying to exhaust her limited abilities, and even went so far as to boast shamelessly and propose to dance for everyone. Xian Li's expression had slightly stiffened. He knew that the piece that this young girl had played was Guangling verse. In this very piece of Guangling verse, the contents were about Nie Zheng's revenge for his father during the Warring States period, and his historical deed of assassinating the Han Wang. This was exactly a story about revenge. So why would the eldest young miss of the Jiang family chose such a musical composition filled with such a murderous and combative mood at this moment when there are lovely flowers and a round moon, wherein everything is wonderful and everyone is feeling cheerful? Guangling verse video link. Here is some background about this piece. It is a Grand Guqin piece of ancient China, originated from the piece Nie Zheng's Assassin of Lord Han. The whole piece is divided into 45 paragraphs, and the music is bold and exciting, full of rebelliousness as it pictures the exciting scene of one of the most famous assassins on Chinese history. Therefore, it is very difficult for Jiang Ruan to use a flute/whistle to play this alone instead of using a zither. Although these one or two sections appeared to be ordinary and made everyone remark on her mediocre skills, yet Xian Li knew that in these two sections, there was turbulent undercurrents, and if one were not genuinely in that deliberate state of mind, where one feels such emotions, then that person would be unable to play the piece out. As for him, from this piece of hers, he could hear the forbearance and loneliness that seemed to span for several centuries. Apart from Xian Li alone, there were others who had felt this way as well. When the music note had barely just echoed, Xiao Xiao, who had been sitting alone before the window, had then slightly raised an eyebrow as his gaze fell upon the young lady who was performing a tune all by herself. After those few sections, Jiang Ruan then unhurriedly began to move. As those red clothes moved in the spry and lively dancing, it was like an alluring phantom that had fallen to the mortal realm, extremely evil yet extremely beautiful. Spins, standing on tiptoes, lifted arms and kicks. As for what she had executed, never was one movement more graceful, more moving, and was just so glamorously stirring that it had made one unable to take their eyes off her. Gradually, everyone began to take back their gazes of scorn, and could barely cover up the wisps of amazement in their eyes. That was the span of countless decades of her quiet endurance and grief, of the premature departure of her mother and her elder brother that had left her on her own in the world. It was the portrait of how her father had impatiently exchanged her for the imperial edict, and had her sent into unfathomable depths of the palace. It was for the man who had become the reigning monarch, her loved one whom she had thought was warm and considerate to her, and yet was the one to proclaim herself as a calamitous beautiful woman who would ruin a nation. It was for her Dime who had caused her to become a human swine and had made her watch with despair as her young son had been intimately trifled with until he died. Dime. This refers to the younger legitimate sister, or here Jiang Su, who has the privilege of being part of the legal family and therefore, the perks of noble peerage and access to. Her dance was sorrowful, as if in the very next second she would ride the winds and return, and without knowing why, it had caused others to call to mind a mournful scene in their hearts. Gradually, for some people who had been watching, their eyes had welled up in grief and sorrow. Once the slow-moving dance had passed, the whistling sound in her mouth had begun to hasten expediently, as if a powerful army had tread forth and brought forward a fierce, bloodthirsty and imposing manner. Abruptly, her movements sped up, so swiftly so that some of the audience could not see her movements clearly and could only feel that that robe of red clothes seemed like blood. Under the moonlight, it seemed astonishingly beautiful. Yet, the sounds of music were impassioned and every tone seemed like a sob. Naturally, that was the sorrow of hers that had reached the pinnacle of pain she had to endure. It had transformed into an unforgettable hatred that had been carved into her bones and engraved into her heart. It was a demand of a spirit filled with vengeance that had crawled out of the depths of hell for the people who owed her a life's debt. It was simply a demand for their lives, a hidden ruthlessness and viciousness that could not allow them to get away with it. It was an indifference that demanded one to stand upon the peak to overlook every living being. In the shining moonlight, as it was reflected upon her little face that seemed sparkling and translucent like snow, her eyes were astonishingly bright. However, contrary to expectations, not the slightest bit of a smile was reflected in her gaze. What remained was only a deep-rooted indifference and mockery, as if she was an Azura, but at the same time she seemed like a goddess, a beautiful woman that was willfully heedless of all living things. Azura, a malevolent spirit in Indian mythology. That vengeful music composition was still resounding and that vengeful dance still continued on. This dance had already made everyone feel fear and trepidation, since they had never seen a person dance this beautifully, so beautifully that it made people frightened. As if she was the person in the music piece, a hatred that had been filled and hidden in her chest for her want to avenge, even if she would not hesitate at all to pay any price for it. Even if she needed to enter the abyss of hell once more, then she too would drag someone to be buried with her. Yet it seemed she was indifferent to squandering her life. This was an enchanting woman that had been born solely for revenge. Intimately and softly, low and tender, just like a pair of children, our gratitude and grudges are like intimate whispers between us. Suddenly, there comes a majestic and reverberating sound that brings to mind how the brave warriors charge forth into an enemy battlefield. Like floating clouds soaring in the broad and distant world, the willow cat can float as if without root or stem, while 100 birds gaily chirp away. Suddenly above them all, a lone phoenix could be heard. Yet even as the steep precipice of the cliff pressures one downwards that makes it difficult to climb up even an inch, to abruptly lose momentum would be a fall of 1,000 zhang, like loose rocks falling into an abyss. Oh, but a pity, like everyone else, I have a pair of ears that are inept in appreciating and understanding music. Hearing by mine ears monkeyings playing at times, supple yet at times firm. Thou rouses a highly capable person to experience through the rises and falls of it. In a flurry mine fingers reach out to shelter from and grasp hold of the chain. Alas, these moist tears of mine have long since surged up and welled in mine eyes. O monkeying, thine skill is truly exceptional. Wouldst thou not torment my bosom with the ice and fire? This entire poem hearing monkeying play the qin was written by the Tang dynasty poet, Han Yu. At that time, monkeying was a Buddhist monk that had been extremely adept at playing the qin and had previously requested some poets to listen and create some poems in praise of it. There are numerous poems of various poets with each their own feelings and differing thoughts about his playing. Through the poem, one can tell that Han Yu had experienced happiness, fear, grief and joy while listening to it. The music had made many abrupt changes, with all sorts of feelings welling up in one's heart that remain inexpressible. Thus, this poem aids one in understanding the turbulent emotional highs and lows that everyone present had experienced while sitting through Zhang Ruan's dancing and musical performance. As the piece lingered at its end, the red clothes that had been fluttering in the wind abruptly became pinched. Yet, as she raised her head with that fine black hair of hers that fell to her waist like a waterfall, it seemed as glamorous and mesmerizing as satin. Her charming complexion seemed as bewitching as a siren, and with a raise of those charming eyes of hers that almost seemed to have not swept a glance over Jiang Susu, she raised her hand towards her own neck and made a beheading gesture. Jiang Susu's body had stiffened and Zhang Ruan smiled sweetly. As the beauty smiled, it was as if in just one night, the spring flowers in Great Jinchao had piled up, layer by layer, and blossomed. It was so beautiful that it made people feel that to take even one more glance would have been sacrilegious. Xiao Xiao's elegant and handsome face remained as cool and frigid as before, while those long lashes of his had covered up the slightest traces of contemplation in his eyes. Chapter 61. Chapter 61. Setting off lanterns. Zhang Ruan stood completely still at the ship's bow as if she was not a part of this world. For a moment, everyone was silent and feeling absolutely captivated by what they had just witnessed. The whole time the young masters, who watched with silly expressions on their faces, were mumbling, "There's such an unrivaled beauty among mortals. Having a glimpse at her today, I have no regrets even if I were to perish." Sitting upright inside the boat, Jiang Susu's complexion was ashen. Her usual smiling face now contorted into a fierce look. Zhang Li too had not only gripped her hands fiercely, but also clenched her pearly white teeth until they were almost broken into pieces. The fifth prince opened his mouth to speak as his eyes flashed with greed. "She is an equal match to the second young miss of the Zhang family." Xianli had a complicated look on his face. Somehow, he felt that there was something about this young girl that attracted him profoundly. He really wanted to examine the girl's appearance more carefully. The crowd was silent for a full quarter of an hour. The young master from the general's fu took the lead in shouting, "Both beauty and skills are exceptional. It's not an exaggeration to say that you're the capital's #1 beauty." Zhang Ruan turned her head. She smiled faintly, seemingly grateful to him. The young master's face blushed when he glimpsed her dazzling beauty. His gaze was suddenly obsessed. Jiang Susu's expression was even more unsightly after she heard that remark. She couldn't understand why Zhang Ruan, living in the countryside and having never had any teachers, was able to dance and play the whistle so well. She had always been conceited about her own talents, but she knew that she wouldn't be able to match Zhang Ruan's level in performing that dance. Besides, how could she dance so steadily and not fall when the ship was tossing about? Jiang Susu would never know that since Zhang Ruan was not favored by the emperor while living inside the palace, she was often bullied by the favored concubines and was taught to dance at the imperial concubine's birthday. She trained so much that her feet hardly seemed to touch the ground. Even after a lifetime had passed, she would never forget it. She could even dance in the palm of one's hand. What could this swaying boat count as? The crowd echoed that remark. They gave much more praise to her in comparison to Jiang Susu, since people always prefer shiny new toys. Admittedly, Jiang Susu was excellent. However, she had occupied the title of the capital's most talented woman for many, many years. On top of that, she had the appearance of an innocent fairy who was not well versed in the ways of the world. Now Zhang Ruan, the eldest young lady of the Zhang family, had a completely different demeanor. As long as Zhang Ruan was more outstanding, even by a tiny bit, people's attention would gravitate toward her. The men praised her highly, but the women's faces were not so good. Originally, the Zhang clan only had Jiang Susu. Now Zhang Ruan had appeared. Weren't all the excellent men in the capital about to become fascinated by those two? When Jiang Ruan returned to her seat, Lin Zixiang remarked, "So actually you can dance. People can't help but have a newfound respect for you now." Zhao Jinjun and Wen Fei had an unrefined temper. They also nodded. "You've dazzled our eyes. But your whistle was truly excellent. Can you teach us?" "When I was living in the countryside, I didn't have any musical instruments. So I simply played it when I was bored." Zhang Ruan explained in such a way that sounded reasonable and made people feel a little more pity for her. Dong Yinger took a look at her. "But why did you choose the Guangling verse? Most noble ladies would not choose such a tune for today's occasion." Zhang Ruan smiled. "I can play only this." Su Ruashi's complexion was somewhat wan. She hung her head without speaking a word. Everyone knew that she was upset and pretended not to see her in order to avoid embarrassing her. Soon after, several noble ladies went on to perform, but it was nothing but a mere formality. After Zhang Ruan's Guangling dance that shook the audience to their core, they weren't interested in watching the flat and insipid performances that followed. At this year's Lantern Festival, a dark horse appeared from the Jiang family. They all said that this year's rabbit lantern must fall into Jiang Ruan's hand. Aboard the Qingsong boat, people were discussing and comparing Jiang Susu in her former days to today's Jiang Ruan. After the performance, it was time for everyone to go toward the bow of the boat to float the lanterns into the river. These floating lanterns were all exquisitely made. After all the young masters and the young ladies had written on slips of paper and put them inside the lantern, they pushed their floating lanterns personally into the river. Jiang Ruan also followed the crowd to the bow of the boat. Her smile was very moving. In her previous life, the scandal broke out before she could float her lantern. When she was hiding inside the boat, shivering with cold, it was the 8th Prince, Xianli, who came over with a lantern and spoke to her. "What do you wish for?" His tall body blocked her from people's contemptuous glances. At that very moment, she just wanted to latch on to the man in front of her, who gave her so much warmth. She put her cherished hope in that lantern to be by his side. Alas, her wish eventually turned into a conspiracy through and through. As Jiang Ruan recalled, the person she hated the most was not actually Xianli compared to him. Jiang Susu was the one who had deprived her of more things. However, Xianli was also wrong. He shouldn't have given her hope. He had made her, who fell into a desperate strait, think that she had grasped a life-saving straw. It resulted in the mallet of death. After having received care and warmth, she was told that everything was a sham. Bai Ji handed her the lantern while Lian Qiao passed the paper and writing brush to her. Zhang Ruan thought for a moment. She took the paper from Lian Qiao but did not write anything on it. She rolled the paper up and put it inside the lantern. Jiang Susu, who had been watching all her movements, saw this action and came approaching. She asked, "Dejejia, why didn't you write anything on the lantern?" Jiang Susu's voice was deliberately loud. Jiang Ruan was now put on the spot. Immediately, people from both boats turned their gazes toward her. "I have nothing to ask for, so I have nothing to write," Jiang Ruan replied indifferently. Jiang Susu smiled. "How can Dejejia have nothing to ask for? For instance, requesting father's health, winning titles for eldest brother, making our Jiangfu prosper, or having our mother give us a younger brother. In short, how can you have no requests?" Her words were equivalent to accusing Jiang Ruan of disloyalty, being unfilial, cruel and unjust, and without any thoughts for the Jiangfu's welfare. This kind of accusation made Bai Ji and Lian Jiao frown. Jiang Ruan listened with a sneer. "Father? How was Jiang Quan a father? He would sell his son and daughter to pave the way for Jiang Susu. Mother? Her mother's bones had already turned to ashes, and there was no one else in this world. Elder brother? Recently there had been no news of him. It was unknown whether he's still alive or already dead." Jiang Susu's remarks were like adding salt to the wound. "I had no idea." Jiang Ruan's voice was gentle as if she had no anger at all. "Father is in good health. Otherwise, how can he serve in court? About the matter of second elder brother getting the top scorer title in the examination, we also can't help him with that. Who can help mother to have a little brother, if not Guanyin the goddess of mercy? How is it related to us?" Guanyin is short for Guanxian, which means the one who perceives the sounds of the world. Guanyin is a bodhisattva, a person who is motivated by supreme compassion, and is a potential Buddha in training. She is associated with Mahayana Buddhists. She is commonly known as the goddess of mercy, and her main aspect is compassion. Guanyin's mixture of male and female characteristics led her to become one of the most widely beloved Buddhist figures. According to the ancient followers, she had powers to make miracles happen. Her lips were raised up slightly. In the world, what really matters is your own efforts. The heart is sincere, but the future, after all, is still up to us, isn't it? Her voice had a trace of melancholy. I used to worship Buddha, but in the end my mother passed away and my elder brother's whereabouts are unknown. Tell me what a request from the heart can really achieve. It all depends on the person. This remark was heard by the crowd. Emotsong burst out laughing. Seeing Xiao Xiao looking at him, he quickly said, I only thought Zhang family's eldest Mrs. Speech was indeed wonderful. Cough. The birth of a child is really not something that they can control. Zhang Ruan's speech was humorous without preaching. Hearing about her pitiful life, people were filled with sympathy. Zhang Susu's expression turned menacing, but she had to pretend to be happy. After everyone had put down their lanterns, Zhang Ruan also bent down to put her lantern into the river. When she was about to stand up, Zhang Susu, without any changes in her expression, quietly stretched her foot out and tried to trip her. Translated by Mazu. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.